The boss was angry, threw papers around, and scolded the woman for the bad report, asking if she really thought this was normal. The director told her to stay after work and redo the report. If she didn't, he'd fire her. She only had herself to blame. Things were tense at work again. June came over to apologize and left. She allowed it, since he'd worked hard today. June noted that she would have to sit until nightfall. She said that this was normal and everything would be fine. Kang Hyuna overdid it again. She suddenly died in the office, unable to feel her body. She thought it might have been an explosion. Alone, as always. Death at work is sad, but now there will be no pain. This even comforted her a little. The man shouted that she was ignoring him and disrespecting Margaret again. He said he had told her this many times before. The heroine didn't believe such a thing was possible. After her death, she was reincarnated in the body of a villain from a women's strategy game. Garden of Guardians is a game where you build relationships with one of 4 heroes. It's both a strategy game and an RPG, and a top-rated title in Korea. That life was hateful, so dying is no pity. But why she became a villain is unclear. Velita Alden is the Marquis's daughter, beautiful and noble, but she has a terrible character and a nasty temper. The Alden family is almost as powerful as the Imperial family. Margaret considers Velita a friend, but she constantly humiliates her. In the good ending, Margaret is saved by one of the knights who kills Velita. In one of them, it's her brother Luther who does the killing. The heroine realized she'd been turning Margaret down for a long time, and the man in front of her was her brother, one of Margaret's suitors. Luther screamed, asking if she was crazy to laugh at him. He raised his hand, but she wasn't about to suffer. The girl fell to her knees. Luther was shocked. She was usually furious, but suddenly she was so submissive. He turned around and said that this wouldn't work anymore. If he hurt Margaret again, he'd hand her over to the dogs. She felt hurt. Why did she meet him now? And why did she behave so humiliatingly in front of this beast? She wanted to play with him, but now she's decided he and Margaret will disappear. For the villain, the good ending is death. In the bad ending, the heroine dies. Velita ordered Margaret to be called when the maid said she was waiting in the living room. A hidden objective appeared on the screen. Complete the game and return home. Failure means being stuck in the game forever. Velita was surprised, as she didn't remember adding such a menu herself. She assumed it was simply an automatic setup. She created the game, but she wasn't happy with the rules. She decided she wouldn't let herself be killed and would rewrite the plot. Margaret is the heroine, everyone's favorite, but she's always the one who kills Velita. To survive, you have to gain her trust. When they met, Velita tearfully asked if she had offended her. This behavior surprised Margaret. The girl justified herself, but Margaret didn't believe it. She was too worried. The girl called her an incredible beauty. The heroine admitted she thought Margaret wouldn't come. After all, they hadn't spoken for a week, so she must have been offended. According to the script, Margaret is always kind to Velita, no matter what she's like. Now the heroine felt shame in her body. Velita apologized, saying she'd often offended her. But if forgiveness wasn't enough, at least the friendship remained. Margaret was simply surprised. They were still friends after all. The real Velita would never have apologized like that. It became clear to Velita that Margaret was too kind. She shouldn't get involved with people like Luther. Margaret's words made the girl feel better, but Luther scolded her for ignoring him, so she worried and tried to avoid making mistakes. Margaret was shocked. She wouldn't have asked anyone to scold Vella. She also asked if Luther had insulted her friend again. Margaret hugged Vella, promising to explain everything to Luther and protect their friendship. Vella knew he would be angry. The girl was overjoyed. Everything was getting better. She just needed to be with Margaret. She believed that now nothing could separate them. Velita decided to support Margaret, but she was afraid that she wouldn't last long. She didn't know how to behave according to etiquette at all. The girl didn't understand why the dinner that Carlon Alden hosted every 2 weeks was taking place today. Only children with gray hair and green eyes are considered heirs. The rest were expelled along with their mother. Tension reigned in the house. The head of the family was deciding who deserved to stay and who didn't. Velita felt like she was finished. One of the guys started bragging that their magical goods were purchased by the imperial family itself. Carlin asked how he knew that. The guy said he had people in the palace, and the goods had received nothing but rave reviews. The girl was surprised that he wasn't afraid of flattery. Luther said his spy was useless, just collecting rumors. His father agreed and told him not to believe the gossip. Velita had no time for other people's problems. She was afraid of attracting attention. She regretted not hiring a maid and began cutting the steak herself. Suddenly there was a noise, but Father ordered silence. A steak fell on Velita's head. Father became angry at the disturbance. Her father kicked Velita out, saying she wouldn't leave until she learned some manners. He threatened to kill her if she didn't learn to eat properly. She was quickly thrown out, and Luther said that she was a disgrace and had asked for her own death. She may have imagined this world, but it was little different from her old one. She decided to change everything. The real Velita lived in the same hell. She's 18, but in the game she was 21. That means the heroine has 3 years. The newspaper only confirmed her fears. Everything was terrible. But she made it all up, so there was no point in complaining. To survive, the heroine needs to establish a relationship with Margaret and get the right people to act according to her plan. This world contains magic and artifacts that grant power. The Aldens supplied these to the palace and became rich. People were used for artifacts. Without mana, they were enslaved. With mana, they were used for materials. Everything was sold secretly. The auction house where slaves and magical bodies were sold was called Ananta. 3 years remained before the events of the novel began. Velita was glad she'd figured it all out in advance. Ananta would be arriving soon, and she'd have to go there. She decided to scout everything out beforehand. She was angry at those who were frying a steak on her head and decided to go on reconnaissance and at the same time teach them a lesson. The first of the month arrived. Velita had difficulty finding normal clothes. Margaret helped her, even teaching her table etiquette. The girl was in a hurry. Luckily, the map revealed a secret passage that wasn't even in the book's plot. She was delighted. Secret passages are a handy thing. Perhaps there were similar ones in the imperial castle. Velita arrived safely through the secret passage. She hid under a veil. Her goal was not participation, but infiltration. She had neither an invitation nor money. She hoped she wouldn't meet anyone she knew there. Luther, in her opinion, is most likely being rejected by Margaret again, and there is no need to worry about him. The situation with the rest was unclear, but Velita decided she would have noticed them immediately. The auction began. The host explained that if you liked the lot, you just need to raise the number you received at the entrance. The first lot is a burly male gladiator in his early 20s. He can be used in a variety of ways. Slaves were considered objects here. They were equipped with magical bracelets that would explode if they escaped. Escape was impossible. The price was 500,000 ilons. It was disgusting for Veli to hear this. After all, he was human. The worst part is, she orchestrated all of this. Not just Ananta, but all this horror, and the slaves' feelings too. The auction continued, and she felt helpless. The host announced the final, 8th lot. Velita had no right to turn away. The host said this item was especially rare. They had been caught with the help of a respected individual. The final lot was 2 people at once. Velita couldn't understand why they were being sold together. The curtain rose. They were twins from the Tang clan, caught in the savannah. Their yellow-blue eyes confirmed their clan membership. Buyers wondered if magic had changed the twins' eyes, but some claimed they were real. Velita was shocked to hear about the Tang clan and knew that the big day had arrived. The Tang clan was considered a fearsome people in Savannah, making the area a danger zone. They produced children with yellow and blue eyes. These children had strength and became warriors. The game recalled such twins. Velita decided to forget about revenge on Carlin. Now it was more important to save the twins, because according to the plot, they were connected to her death. In the game, the Tan twins were dead and were turned into a magical item. which was given to the villain and became a weapon. This artifact destroyed the world, and Velita died. To prevent this, she must save them. Lot number 31 was valued at 500,000 illion, approximately 500 million won. Velita thought the twins weren't cheap. She didn't know what to do, because she came secretly and had no money or number. The screen announced the kidnapped people. Freeing them will unlock helpers and unlock new storylines. Velita didn't understand how this was possible, since the plot hadn't even begun yet, and she wasn't even the main character. It was merely a possibility for new branches, not a guarantee. Velita decided not to dwell on it. She had no choice. The stakes grew, first 1 million, then 1.5 million. Someone offered 4 million, then 12. Everyone turned around. It was Velita. She had a number and 70 million illion. Velita was stunned by the sum. 70 billion won. She suspected the money was for a mission. This amount matched the sales volume of The Guardian's Garden. She understood why it was so high. Now she's obligated to spend them. She remembered how she'd been scolded for selling and chuckled. The host repeated the bet of 12 million. Velita knew that even if they bought the twins, they would still want to use them. This had to be stopped immediately. She thought of Carlin and spared no expense. Lot number 44 was sold. Velita became uneasy. She didn't understand why this particular number. In Vintag Alley, she asked the twins if there were any people nearby, but they only stared silently. Velita decided to gain his trust and cut her hand. Blood dripped onto the shackles, which began to disappear. The shackles dissolved. Velita was glad that the Alden blood had proven useful. She explained that she could remove the shackles, but before she could finish, the twins grabbed her, smelling her scent. She smelled like a snake, like the one who caught them. One of them wanted to eat her. Velita realized that she had made a mistake. She had freed them, but now they were hostile. She didn't know how to prove she wasn't guilty. She smiled and went into inventory. She offered cake, and the twins let go of her and grabbed the food. She would have preferred meat. They asked what she would do with them. They found it hard to believe, but Velita needed meat. Velita explained that since she had freed them, she wouldn't capture them. Even as slaves, they could kill her. Velita asks the twins to help save other people because they have abilities, but they refuse, considering her a stranger. Velita reminds them that she saved them and offers a way to escape the shackles. She warns them to be careful not to get caught. Velita decides that everything has been said and the twins will not see her again. But the connections to the new plot lines remain unclear. A message appears. The kidnapped people have been freed. Velita receives a reward, new assistance, and a chance to open a new storyline. The former owner demands money for the stolen goods. The young man, arguing with the auctioneer, tells the owner that they've lost the people. The owner asks who said Vintag Street is blocked and scolds the guy for being useless. He apologizes. The guy continues to apologize, and the owner, Noah Elsius, comments that he doesn't remember getting a parrot. Noah Elsius bought the twins and then disappeared. His owner orders him to be closely monitored, especially his head and tail. The owner is sorry he wasn't able to meet the person who bought the twins. He's very interested in them. Velita isn't feeling well. She's been dreaming about Noah all night. Of the 4 main characters, 2 are normal and 2 are not. Noah Elsius, an archmage with an attractive and ducal title, creates the image of an ideal groom. Noah imprisoned Margaret. Velita fears running into him on Ananta, but is glad he didn't. Velita hears screams. The man doesn't understand how the slaves escaped. He's outraged that now they'll stop being afraid of them. The man sends away his subordinate, calling him an idiot, and Velita feels relieved to see how difficult it is for him. The task is accomplished, and the twins fulfill the request. Their father's cries calm Velita. Luther bursts into the room. Velita asks if he's been taught to knock, and he wonders why she's so calm. Velita jokes that she's ready to blow out the candles because Luther is in trouble, or even put a stake on his head. Luther is angry, and Velita says that he is naive because he himself broke into her room. Luther asks if Velita called him Margaret, Margaret's nickname. Velita confirms, but says it's unpleasant. He must try hard and avoid mistakes, otherwise she'll get it. Luther is defeated, and Velita warns him not to harm Margaret. She is shocked to see the twins in the window. Velita sends Luther away, asking him not to harm Margaret by ruining her appetite. Luther notices her strange behavior. The lady lets the twins in and asks how they found her. They remain silent, and she doesn't understand what the problem is. One of the twins says, "Meat," and Velita realizes they are reproaching her for eating without them. Velita takes the meat out of the inventory, and the twins' expressions change. She notices that the Tang clan resembles dogs. She thanks the twins for fulfilling her request. The girl is surprised at how she knows and asks if she really is a magician. The girl asks if they were following her. The guy replies that they're allowed to do that, and she confirms that she didn't notice them. Velita says she's not a mage and asks if they sense power from her. They confirm it, but can't explain her actions. Velita is surprised that the twins followed her and freed the people, calling her a fool. This is strange for them. The girl warned that if they called her a fool again, there would be no meat. The twins immediately apologized, admitting their mistake. Velita said it was difficult to explain her abilities, especially before they left. They wouldn't be seeing each other anymore. The twins declared they wouldn't return to Savannah but would stay here. Velita was shocked, but they were confident they wouldn't be caught. The twins decided to kill their captor, but Velita forbade it. They laugh, asking why she's smiling and not holding back. The girl asked if Velita would be happy if they killed her father. She replied that she couldn't rejoice over the death of a loved one. The twins demanded meat. Velita explained that she couldn't let them kill Carlon, as she still needed him even if he was a villain. Although Carlon is a villain, Velita admits she made him that way herself. If the twins kill him, it will be revenge, but she doesn't want that. The twins said they wouldn't kill him. Velita was surprised and asked why. They replied that she said he was needed. The twins wanted to protect her because they were interested in her. They explained that only the Tang clan itself could save the Tang clan. Velita shed blood for them, and the twins became intrigued by her identity. Now they want to learn more about her and her fate. Velita learned their names, Raheel and Roxa. She introduced herself and hoped they would get along. Roxa said she should hope so, and Rachel added that they would bend over backwards to protect such a fragile girl. Velita knew she had to endure this, because she was wrong. She decided to ask the twins for help. Rachel asked if she would die if they didn't fulfill her request. Velita replied that nothing good would happen. Velita tasked them with finding a man named Austin Hill. He could save her life. 4 days later, a bag containing a chart appeared in Velita's room. It indicated that she would be meeting with Austin Hill. Austin Hill became commander-in-chief of an aristocratic household, which elevated his status. He was a sought-after ally. He later became a high-ranking official, helping the heroes defeat the villain. Many families wanted him on their side. The sign asked if Velita wanted to continue. She realized he had most likely been kidnapped, and she didn't yet know what would happen next. Velita was disappointed, because she'd asked them to bring him back safely. Now they'd kidnapped him, but they were looking at him as if they were expecting praise. Velita nevertheless praised them, calling them good fellows. They received a reward, meat. Velita asked if Austin was okay. He replied that he didn't look okay. Austin was frightened and asked what she was going to do with him. Velita explained that it was a misunderstanding. Velita clarified that she did not kidnap him for his body, and that she was not the twins' owner. The main character questioned the twins' behavior. Austin assumed it was an order from the snake's cunning master. The twins continued to ask for meat. Velita praised Austin for his insight, noting that the snake trusts no one, not even its own young. Austin confirmed that the snake is cunning. Austin noted that the snake's daughter was very different from what was said about her. The protagonist acknowledged that he was observant and well-informed about Velit. Velita agreed that the snake didn't trust its young. She suggested they consider another situation, and Austin asked about her deceptions. Velita didn't like Austin's comment. He said the baby snakes were different, which could explain the Alden clan's success. Velita added that they had a role model. Velita asked if it wasn't strange that snakes dreamed of leaving their lair. Alden asked if she was planning to separate from their kind. The main character replied that she was planning to do this later and that she needed Austin to achieve her goals, although the method was crude. Austin was stunned. He'd been kidnapped and now they were hiring him. Velita reminded him that she was still an Alden. Velita compared herself to a snake, shedding its skin but remaining a snake. She spoke of her escape to Ananta and the birth of the Tan twins. Austin was surprised by her openness. Velita said she saw no point in hiding it, since he already understood everything. Velita promised to break out because she had a goal. She needed Austin to mitigate the risks and was willing to take the loss. Austin asked if he was her loss. The main character said that if Austin didn't want to be her loss, he should try harder. Austin was shocked, as he hadn't yet agreed to work for her. Velita asked him what was wrong, whether she was not meeting his demands. She assured him that she could achieve her goal. Austin looked at her, and Velita asked what salary he wanted. This greatly surprised him. Velita said she paid $12 million for the Tan twins and offered Austin 10,000 illions to start with. In addition, she offered an advance of 100,000 illion, bonuses, incentives, and a salary increase as the contract continued. Austin accepted Velita's proposal, promising to do his best. She was delighted and ordered him to call her head. Austin agreed, even though many families wanted him. Graham Cordes appeared on the nightly orders training grounds. He was called, and he approached, knowing who was waiting for him. Graham asked how Count Ellen had become a knight with that expression on his face. Ellen said it was important to comfort a friend, not his face. Graham didn't care if he was crying. Ellen asked Graham what was more important, his friend or his reputation. Graham replied, "Reputation," and then joked about the lady possibly turning him down. Ellen was furious and reported that Austin Hill had disappeared. Graham was shocked, asking if this was the Austin he wanted to hire. Ellen said he was preparing the money for Austin, but someone beat him to it. Graham didn't know who might have lured him away. The guy couldn't understand how Austin could have been hired, but Graham replied that whoever got it first got it. Ellen was outraged and doubted Graham's position. Graham was on the side of the one with more money, and Austin perhaps was too. Ellen complained about a world ruled by money and the lives of those who don't have it. The knight told Ellen he couldn't speak like that, given his earldom. Graham wondered who could have hired Austin. Margaret noticed that Velita looked pale, worried about her friend. Velita explained that it wasn't because of her father or Luther. Velita realized her serious demeanor might be cause for concern. She insisted everything was fine and that she had no interest in her father or Luther. She asked Margaret not to worry, as she was doing well and had no interest in them. Margaret said she'd like to be Velita's sister. Velita replied that she already was and suggested calling her that. Margaret was surprised, and Velita wondered if she wanted to be her sister. Margaret realized it was a joke and asked him to stop. Velita asked why she was the older sister if they were the same age. She agreed to be the older sister if Velita wanted. Velita found it funny how Margaret wanted to be the older sister. Margaret decided to be the younger sister, agreeing with this. Velita asked if Luther had been pestering Margaret. She replied that he had become less insistent and assumed he was busy. Velita believed Luther was courting Margaret, but the Carlons wouldn't accept her because of her poverty. She had to act quickly. Velita said she would solve the problem. Margaret tried to dissuade her, but Velita assured her everything would be fine. Margaret hugged Velita, wishing her happiness. Velita would do anything to save her friend from this bad fate. Margaret promised to return. Velita warned her to be careful. Austin asked if her goal was truly to make Margaret happy. Velita confirmed that Margaret was sweet. Austin was worried about Luther, but Velita wanted to find a protector for her friend. Velita smiled, saying she was looking for a man to spite Luther. She thought it was only natural. Prince Kyle and Greyholm were potential protectors of Margaret. Velita was ready to help her friend if she showed interest in either of them. If Margaret liked one of them, Velita would catch it and give it to her. Austin didn't know what his mistress had in mind. Velita said she hadn't planned anything. She was simply wondering what kind of men Margaret would like. She was prepared to find a solution if things didn't work out. Velita believed there was no need to adjust to a specific ending, since she was the one who orchestrated the events. She could become Margaret's protector. Velita added that she and Austin had 4 years, 3 before the story begins and a year to prepare. Everything could change with her intervention. Velita decided to take action, placing her trust in Austin. She promised to give him a job and not disappoint him. Austin joked that he had a nut for a head, like Velita. He promised to do everything in his power. Roxa and Rachel were to stay nearby and keep an eye on safety. If they left, a note was to be left. Velita asked everyone for help. 4 years flew by, and everyone began to implement her plan. In Gallon Alley, everyone rejoiced at Velita's return. She wondered why they were waiting for her, since Austin was responsible for them. Her subordinates said they simply missed her. Over the course of 3 years, Velita built a team, earned money, and built up capital. Velita directed the proceedings, and Austin handled the rest, but everyone always wanted the mistress. She didn't interact closely with her subordinates, except for Chon. The girl asked her mistress why she had ordered these weeds to be collected. Velita saw Lurop for the first time and noticed that the girl had collected a lot of grass. The girl explained that there was a lot of grass, not just a little. Velita replied that even if she explained, not everyone would understand, and that she simply had to follow the instructions. Velita praised everyone and noted that it was time to leave. Everyone was upset, and the girl said goodbye. The lady had worries and expectations, and a new chapter in her life had begun. In the Flame Trade Guild office, Margaret was worried about the large losses due to the slow pace of work. The girl asked if this was a serious problem. Margaret explained that the orders came from the Aldens, but it still required a lot of money. Margaret feared that if things continued like this, they would go bankrupt. The maid suggested that she meet Lady Velita for dinner. Margaret agreed, as her interactions with Velita always inspired her. The maid was pleased to see their strong friendship, but the girl felt awkward. Suddenly, a servant ran in and announced that a man from the Setar clan had arrived. Margaret was surprised and asked if there was an urgent matter. Margaret realized it was the mysterious clan, and the servant confirmed it. The man wanted to see her, not her father. She was surprised. The servant said her father had entrusted this matter to his daughter. Margaret decided to meet the guest and asked for him to be brought. The guest greeted Margaret respectfully. He introduced himself and asked if she had bought the white cat with one eye at auction. Lucille offered to buy a cat. Margaret noticed his unusual personality and appearance and inquired about the reason for his visit. Lucille asked to buy the cat and offered to trade it for something valuable. Margaret confirmed the purchase, and he placed a mysterious box on the table. Opening the box, Margaret saw the Setar clan's amulet. This stone was considered mysterious and valuable. The amulet was a revered treasure among the Setar clan. Rumors said its owner would forever be rich and respected. 100 years ago, Emperor Astacia reigned successfully after receiving this amulet from the Setar clan. Lucille offered it for a cat, which seemed odd. Margaret bought the cat cheaply. She remarked that the figurine was truly beautiful and likely very important to Lucille. Lucille didn't understand her words, thinking she was trying to raise the price. But Margaret declared that she didn't need the amulet. Margaret offered to simply give the cat away if she was so important to Lucille. He was surprised, and she was delighted to meet a clan representative. Margaret smiled and said her decision was to give the cat away. She asked that they keep an eye on her and not lose her. Lucille said that Margaret was an amazing person and gave her the amulet that he was going to give her, regardless of her reaction. Lucille asked her not to refuse the gift, believing she deserved it. Margaret was surprised and asked what right to the amulet meant. The man said she would learn everything in time. He went outside and began talking to the cat statue, promising to trust Magnus again. Velita passed by, and Lucille thought that it was a strange girl heading towards the new owner of the amulet, which caught his attention. Lucille decided to stay in the Empire, because the game, Garden of Guardians, began, and it all started with Margaret becoming the owner of the amulet. Velita was surprised to learn that Margaret had received the Setar clan's amulet. She was touched to see Margaret's excitement. Margaret invited Velita to examine the amulet, surprising her with the fact that she was wearing the continent's treasure as if it were just a small change. Margaret wanted to return the amulet, but the owner refused, and she decided to keep it, considering it her destiny, since it is beautiful. The amulet glows in the hands of a just man, and only Margaret could possess it. She felt something filling her heart. The girl smiled, admiring the beauty of the amulet. Margaret decided to give it to Velita, not understanding how it happened. Margaret tried to explain that this was too much for a gift, but she didn't want to listen, claiming that the girl deserved such a gift. Velita was reluctant, but agreed, warning that it was a gift from a distant friend, and that the amulet was called the Eye of the Typhoon. Velita adored such gifts, and Margaret accepted, determined not to be upset. Velita congratulated her on her new amulet. The girl hoped that with the amulet, Margaret's life would become calmer, and that she would always help, because she had been preparing her for this for 3 years. The maid admired Velita's performance and felt offended, not understanding why it offended her, because she should be proud of her mistress. The assistant agreed, since the mistress had chosen her, a former mercenary. She asked when Velita would go to the branch, as the deputy had requested. Velita was surprised and replied that she had already been there. The maid assumed the deputy wanted to deliver something in person. The maid advised them to leave as soon as possible because there was a lot of work and everyone was exhausted. Velita didn't understand the problem. The girl asked the maid to stay with Margaret until her return, but after dinner. Austin was surprised by how much weight her master had lost. Austin didn't like her appearance and offered to take on some of the work if she liked her thinness. Margaret declined. Margaret offered Austin a move to the Alden estate if he was having trouble working. He promised to fulfill his duties. Velita inquired about the reason for the summons. Austin said there were remaining questions that required the chief's signature. Austin explained that Lurope had prepared a warehouse for the herbs, but that if he kept more, the herbs would rot. He suggested they start growing them. Velita was surprised, having never thought that weeds could be grown. Austin said, "Girl, it grows quickly and that's its advantage." Austin offered to buy the land and test it. Velita was interested in the proposal because it wouldn't impact finances. Velita instructed Austin to purchase land in the outback and entrust the work only to reliable people. He was also to monitor suspicious activity within the Andra Guild. The Andra Guild is a large criminal organization that profits from illegal activities. Crime rates have increased significantly. The girl noticed in the documents that the Andra Guild was engaged in the trade of prohibited goods and bribed the head of the border guard. Austin reported that they had bribed the border guard more than the Andra Guild and obtained the report. Velita praised him for his successful investigation. Austin joked that he would become the worst kind of scum. He believed their actions were legal and that bribes helped solve crimes and improve the future. The girl decided it was time to stop the investigation, since they had already collected all the necessary information. They had to cut ties with Andra before it was too late. The deputy acknowledged that his mistress was being cruel, but Velita replied that it was necessary. She asked for the information to be completed and left. As they parted, the deputy warned Velita to be careful. The team was upset that she was leaving, and the deputy was the only one who spoke to her privately. Austin noted that anyone wishing to speak with the mistress must take their place. Velita couldn't get used to this arrangement. Velita felt she was late, and Luther was keeping a close eye on her. She left Jill with Margaret to avoid Luther's pestering. The girl was angry at herself for creating Luther, but her family also threatened her. Her father threatened to kick her out, and her mother screamed at her to stay out of their sight. Luther scolded Velita for her stupidity, and her family continued to threaten her. She believed the threats were unrealistic, as her life was safe. Velita thought they were still angry about her disruption of their business in Ananta. That was 3 years ago, when she saved the twins. The auction in Ananta closed, and the Aldens lost their source of income. Their family's situation worsened. Now the time had come to act on Intana. The alley seemed safer to Velidi than the Alden family, though it was far less significant. Suddenly, she saw a man. She assumed he was dead, as the alley was dark and dangerous, frequented by robberies and murders, and this shocked her. When Velita noticed that the man was alive, she calmed down and promised to help him, saying that he needed to be patient for a little while. The man suggested the girl pretend she hadn't seen anything. Velita realized it was Noah Elsius, but she was too shocked to speak. Velita asked why Noah was there, but he only laughed, realizing she knew him. He wondered what to do next in this situation. Noah was a great magician, but what happened to him puzzled Velita. He was poisoned, and the color of his blood confirmed it, but the novel didn't explain why. Noah joked that her gaze couldn't take its toll on his condition. Velita was confused, but thought her appearance might have something to do with it. Velita decided to help and tossed Noah the antidote, but he wasn't pleased with the gesture. His face showed he hadn't expected such help. Noah didn't appreciate the antidote as charity. He laughed and asked if Velita wanted to die, thinking she'd offered him help out of pity. Velita was frightened and explained that she was simply afraid to get too close. It was merely a gesture of assistance, not an act of mercy. Noah continued that her help was charity, and that her knowledge of him was astonishing. Velita decided to pretend she didn't know who he was. The girl said she simply wanted to help a dying man. Noah was amazed that she was willing to sacrifice a valuable item for the sake of another's life, considering her help a divine act. Velita turned away and suggested that the help be considered an angel's descent, but Noah wouldn't let her go, asking where she was going, threatening to rip out her wings. Velita was frightened and stopped, hoping he wouldn't break her legs. She declared that if she wasn't on the ground, her wings would allow her to fly. The girl ran, calling for Rachel. He picked her up, and they started walking away. Rachel asked if the man should be killed. Velita, in Rachel's arms, praised him, thinking that he might attack Noah, but he sat quietly in the shadows, not reacting. Rachel and Roxa always followed Velita, even when they had business to attend to. One of the twins always remained close by, guarding her. Rachel said he would have attacked Noah if he had threatened Velita. He acknowledged Noah's strength and suggested killing him now rather than suffer later. The girl thought he sensed Noah's power. Rachel promised that together with Roxa, they could defeat him, but Velita didn't want to deal with him anymore. The protagonist encountered the poisoned Noah Elsius in an alley and fulfilled the conditions for the hidden ending, opening a new path that will help reveal his end. Velita didn't understand the hidden ending or what it meant. A button appeared to view Noah Elsius's path, and the user's choice could lead to this ending. While Velita was trying to figure out the situation, word came that kidnapped people had been found at Ananta's auction. Freeing them would give her new allies and new storylines. The girl thought the new path was connected to the auction. In the morning, the twins noticed changes in her. Roxa thought the mistress was seriously ill. Rachel was surprised, and Roxa remembered what Velita had said. Strange symptoms are a sign of a bad illness, but she was referring to the saying that strange behavior is associated with death. The twins didn't believe Velita would die soon. She'd spent 3 years working toward a happy ending, and now Noah had appeared, complicating the start of the main plot. Noah kidnapped Margaret and held her captive. The twins discussed what could have caused Velita's illness. Rachel suggested killing Noah, but Velita would not allow it. The girl called out to Rachel and Roxa. They quickly abandoned their thoughts of murder. She hugged them, feeling supported, and realized she felt less anxious with such allies. Velita doesn't regret saving the twins. For her, it was enough, even if it meant fulfilling Noah's destiny. The servants found Noah in shock. Norton asked what his master was holding. Noah promised to explain later, but first they needed to go to the estate to find out something. Norton said he'd verified the information Noah had requested. He explained that it was an expensive antidote, offering the gentleman at least a small amount to drink. Noah drank some of the antidote and left the bottle on the table. Norton asked if he'd finish it, but Noah replied that he regretted drinking it, as it was proof of his first benefactor. The servant said that the antidote was of high quality, and it was possible to find out that it could have been made by Andra, Blame, or the Aldens. Noah was surprised that it could be the Aldens. He decided to check them separately, not allowing the reptiles to peer into the sky. Noah asked about the surveillance. Norton apologized, saying it was difficult because she had accomplices who covered their tracks. Noah was disappointed with the outcome. Noah became curious about who was behind the surveillance. He decided that the more difficult the task, the more fun it would be to break wings. It was becoming more and more exciting for him. Noah was delighted that he could now get his hands on Margaret. A spy in the guild sent a letter stating that Plum Branches was Margaret. The description, white flowers with purple stamens, indicated a person from Setar, and black honey meant an amulet from that clan, passed down to Margaret. Usually, Velida would come to Margaret and they would talk about marriage proposals, but this was something else entirely. If Margaret became the owner of the amulet, her father would recognize her and permit her engagement to Luther. Luther informed his father that Margaret was now the owner, which outraged him. Luther revealed that a man from the Sitar clan had given Margaret the amulet. His father doubted it, but his son assured him he was telling the truth. Luther said that Velida knew about it too. He overheard their conversation about Margaret and the amulet. Father lost his temper. Luther suggested reprimanding Velida, but the main thing was to find the amulet. Velida would not escape punishment. Her father admitted he thought Margaret was stupid, but she turned out to be smart. Luther offered to make her part of the Alden family in order to obtain the amulet. The father agreed, but said he needed to think about it. Luther left, and the father remarked that his son was a complete idiot. Her father doesn't agree with the marriage, even if the amulet is important to Carlon. He would marry her to one of his useless sons. The man decided not to marry her, but simply take the amulet. If she understood everything, Carlon would show generosity. He ordered the carriage to be prepared. Carlon went to the palace and bowed to the emperor. The emperor was surprised by his visit and offered no apologies. Orlando Lucius, the emperor, said that what was more important was that Carlon always brought joy with his visits. He asked what had happened. Carlon said that he was helping the Viscounts Guild, and rumors about the Sitar amulet brought him here. The emperor was surprised and asked again if he was talking about the Sitar amulet. Carlon confirmed this and added that the amulet had ended up in their hands and he wanted to hand it over. The man said that if Carlon brought the amulet, it would help secure his monopoly on the trade in magical items. At the estate, Velida laughed, glad that Luther and Carlon had gone to the castle. She was proud of her fight against Ananta. Rachel was surprised they didn't need to interfere. Velida was going to tell her everything, and she didn't care. Velida thought Carlon had gone to the palace to tell her about the amulet. This could have significantly altered the plot, which wouldn't have been to the main character's advantage. It was important to Velida and her team that Carlon got into the castle, because that was the goal of their efforts. The twins realized that Velida was restricting Ananta not only because of her own desires, but also to prevent further casualties. However, she had an even more important goal she was trying to achieve. The emperor was surprised by the unexpected appearance of the amulet and realized that serious problems could arise if he transferred the right to trade in magical goods to others. Kyle Lucius, the empire's crown prince, joined the discussion and noted that this man was clearly an outlier. He emphasized that this matter required special attention and a thorough investigation. The father, hearing his son's words, asked if he knew all the circumstances. The prince confirmed that he was following the Alden family's developments and noted that he was surprised by the amulet's appearance. Kyle was surprised that his father was aware of such details. The prince expressed a desire to hide these things in a safe place, such as hell, so that no one could find them and use them against them. The emperor understood his son's proposal, but noted that the Aldens were essential to the imperial family. Kyle, in turn, declared that he alone needed them, and therefore turned a blind eye to Ananta's actions in order to preserve them. Kyle declared that under his rule, the Aldens and Ananta would be sent to hell, and that trading rights should not be handed over to them. The emperor called him a fool. The emperor explained that the amulet could not be left with Kyle, as it was not just an object, but a symbol of wealth and glory. Kyle suggested returning the amulet to the Viscounts family, assuming the Aldens had already given it to them. He believed they couldn't know that in advance. Kyle promised to find out the details. His father, considering him a fool, said he would take power from him if he failed. With a smile on his face, Kyle Lucius confidently declared that it was time for the Emperor to prepare to hand over his powers. His father couldn't understand how his son had become like this, but Kyle simply explained that it was all his fault. Kyle Lucius was the next person that Velita sought to build a relationship with, but he was also the one who was determined to get rid of all the Aldens in order to establish his own power. Margaret couldn't contain her delight. She was happy, but at the same time, for a moment she was left in silence, unable to find the words to express her feelings. Velita had noticed the place, but she herself had never heard of it. Margaret didn't immediately understand why they were there. Velita wasted no time in replying that they had come to buy new clothes, but Margaret, still perplexed, reminded them of the dresses she already owned. Velita, smiling, invited Margaret to choose a dress for herself and called the saleswomen over. They, having learned what the ladies were looking for, began showing her several styles. However, Velita wasn't satisfied with the options presented and decided to order something custom. The saleswoman, seeing that the order had been accepted, was delighted and asked if there would be a dress for Velita herself. She was told that Velita would choose a ready-made item, but Margaret would need a new, custom-made one. Margaret was so surprised that she couldn't contain her delight and let out a cry of surprise. The saleswoman ran to get the material, but Velita stopped her, declaring that she preferred to choose the fabric for the dress herself. Margaret was surprised and asked why her friend needed a new dress. Velita replied that she simply wanted to give her a gift. Margaret agreed, but a custom-made dress seemed excessive. Velita took her friend's hands and explained the importance of delighting loved ones with gifts. She asked if Margaret wouldn't allow her to do the same. Margaret threw herself into his arms, saying she didn't know. Velita asked to see the fabric and lace. She wanted to choose everything herself. As they said goodbye, Margaret worried that Velita had spent too much. Velita asked if her friend liked her choice. Margaret replied that she liked everything, but that Velita had chosen a bright dress for her, but not for herself. She offered to pay, but Velita refused. Velita noticed that Margaret was becoming increasingly charming, but this time she couldn't accept her offer. Velita said this too loudly, and Margaret surprised her with her answer. Ronald Ebeden, Viscount, was at the Flame Trade Guild. Margaret approached him and asked why he was pacing in front of the building. Ronald was surprised by her appearance. Ronald offered to speak with his daughter in his office. He wanted to discuss something urgent, and, if Velita didn't mind, he'd invite her along. Ronald led everyone into a spacious office with a round table covered with green cloth. They sat around it as if it were a business meeting. Margaret, trying to hide her growing excitement, cautiously turned to her father, asking whether there really was a letter on the table in front of them that had been sent from the imperial palace itself. Father nodded calmly, confirming that the envelope was addressed specifically to him. He had every right to open it and examine its contents. The letter clearly stated that the amulet was already in Margaret's hands. The girl, visibly worried, asked again if the letter contained anything more significant than information about the amulet's transfer. She was tormented by the thought that the document might contain threats. Then her father, without losing his composure, replied that she should understand what it was all about if she read the lines carefully. The hints were clear, if, of course, she knew what they meant. He added that he trusted Miss Velita completely and therefore sincerely hoped she would not doubt his words and actions. Everything he said came from the heart. The lady, slightly surprised by this statement, calmly reassured him. She assured him that Vika was not there by chance and that she trusted both him and Margaret herself, having no doubts about their intentions. The father who raised Margaret was known in the game as a model of integrity. He was a man who always strived to do the right thing, was kind and caring. His sincerity made him trustworthy. At that moment, Velita, clearly concerned about the situation, decided to ask a frank question, not hiding her excitement. She asked what was behind this mysterious imperial message and what it meant for her. Ronald replied that the letter contained an official invitation. The senders of the letter wanted the owner of the Black Stone, Velita herself, to visit them. This invitation was important and had great significance for her future. The letter also stated that the carriage would arrive in exactly 2 days. Everything had been carefully coordinated, and the arrival time was strictly scheduled, without the slightest deviation from the plan. Additionally, there was a strange phrase in the letter that made one wonder. They hoped that the snake would not bite them when they walked backwards and accidentally stepped on its tail, which sounded like a warning. Velita took these words with cool composure, showing no emotion, but Margaret immediately turned pale. There was obvious fear in her eyes. She sensed the seriousness of the situation. Margaret immediately grasped the meaning of the hint. Her father already knew for certain the true nature of the amulet and who exactly was wearing it. It was a terrifying discovery that boded ill. She was completely confused, unable to understand how her father had managed to find out everything. He had always seemed to her a sneaky, cunning man who could eavesdrop or reveal secrets at any moment. He said that if she wanted to avoid trouble and keep the peace of the family, she needed to accept this invitation. Otherwise, the situation could worsen, and the consequences would be severe for everyone. So she remarked that, in her opinion, they should accept the invitation, including for the sake of Margaret herself, the real owner of the stone, because it was logical. Even if they try to hide or change their appearance, the Emperor will still expose them. He is too smart and observant not to guess. The man wanted to object, but Velita spoke first. She made it clear that she understood his concern. After all, he was worried about his daughter. But in the end, he himself knows what to choose, a snake or a bird of prey. Sometimes you have to decide which is more dangerous, but also more profitable to deal with. 2 days later, they set off. Margaret was beaming with joy, excited, and made no secret of how delighted she was by the trip. Velita, seeing Margaret gradually approaching her goal, noticed her confusion. The girl was beginning to worry, tormented by doubts. She couldn't quite determine whether she could handle the upcoming trials. Velita tried to console her, assuring her that everything would be fine. She emphasized that Margaret was capable of much, but deep down, she still worried about how she would behave around the prince. Margaret was haunted by the thought that the slightest mistake could lead to catastrophic consequences. This fear haunted her, paralyzing her mind, preventing her from focusing on the important things. Seeing her state, Velita took her hand. She spoke confidently, declaring that Margaret wasn't to blame for the situation and that she shouldn't let fear control her. All that mattered was her own peace of mind. Velita advised the girl to stand tall and not be afraid to speak her mind. It's important not to hide behind other people's words, but to be honest and decisive in your actions, regardless of the outside world. She added that Margaret shouldn't pay attention to the opinions of others. She should follow her heart, because it will always tell her what to do right, regardless of doubts and the opinions of others. Velita's words had some effect on Margaret. Her tension eased slightly, and she felt the weight that had been pressing on her shoulders ease slightly, giving her a sense of relief. Thanks to Velita, Margaret felt as if a flame had lit in her chest. Now she no longer doubted herself and her abilities. Confidence filled her steps. Margaret went forward, full of determination, and Velita, smiling softly, said that she would wait for her in the cafe as soon as she completed her task. If Margaret truly succeeded in completing her current tasks, a whole series of meetings, responsibilities, and new challenges awaited her. There would be so much to do that there wouldn't be enough time, but she felt ready for it. In the game's storyline, the prince was never portrayed as a villain. However, in this new world, where everyone has their own feelings and free will, it's difficult to predict how Margaret will behave around him. All of this was still unknown to her. Even if they were destined to be together, she couldn't allow the prince to lead her. That would be the wrong move, disrupting her own path and fundamentally altering her life's direction. Velita made a decision. If the prince began to exert even the slightest pressure on Margaret, she would not hesitate to end their relationship. This way, she could maintain her independence and leadership in their relationship without losing control. Velita considered for a few minutes whether she should try to find other suitors for Margaret's heart. Perhaps that would give her the opportunity to choose and feel truly free in her choices. She was willing to do anything for Margaret. She had become very important to her, and Velita believed her charge deserved only the best conditions and people around her. Margaret felt something dangerous approaching, as if she were walking toward a snake about to strike. The sensation grew stronger, and she felt it was no accident. At such a moment, any sign of weakness could mean the end of everything. So Margaret tried to remain calm and alert, lest she fall into the trap of her emotions. The butler had already managed to warn the prince of his mistress's arrival. He was ready to greet her and awaited her arrival, having prepared everything for this important meeting in his private chambers. The prince greeted Margaret with a joyful expression on his face. His voice was warm, and his gaze was full of interest and attentiveness, immediately creating a feeling of goodwill. Prince Kyle Lucius introduced himself and politely gestured to the chair opposite, inviting Margaret to sit and feel comfortable. His manner was courteous and calm, making it clear she was a welcome guest. The prince admitted that he expected to see the Viscount. After all, according to rumors, the amulet belonged to a man, and therefore he was surprised by what was happening. But it turned out that the owner of the artifact was the heiress, and this was an unexpected but clearly pleasant discovery for the prince. The lady noted with a slight smile that his assumption was quite logical, since her father was the head of their clan, and all actions, including those related to protection, went through him. The prince noted with restraint that the girl was quite modest, and that was endearing. She lowered her gaze slightly, silently thanking him for his kind words, trying to hide her awkwardness. The Ebedon clan had long been under the protection of the Aldens, and he had heard that Ebedon's own daughter got along well with Carlin's daughter, which brought their clans closer together and made the alliance stronger. Rumor has it she was a kind, reserved, and well-mannered girl. Perhaps it's his own prejudices that prevent him from viewing her without bias. Suddenly, he asked how he could be sure of her words, because theoretically she could be lying, and he had no way to verify the truth regarding the amulet. The girl apologized to him with regret, explaining that she also had no way to prove her involvement, and this made the situation difficult. The amulet did not have her name engraved on it, nor any other markings that could confirm that it belonged to her. The prince was surprised by this fact, as he had expected some kind of proof, but the girl explained that she wasn't the only one who could touch this artifact. Then Margaret herself began to think about how to prove she was right if everything was so vague and no one could give a precise answer or explanation. Kyle was completely confused, not understanding why she was even asking him such questions, as if she was seeking his permission to tell her own truth. But truly, there was no reliable way to prove it. No spells, no seals, no ancient words that could confirm her belonging to the amulet. Kyle was shocked that she hadn't even bothered to think about it beforehand. As they walked there, he grew increasingly irritated by her carelessness and nonchalance in such matters. Then the girl, a little embarrassed, apologized. She said he'd simply mentioned wanting to see the amulet's owner, and she'd decided that would be sufficient. The man was even slightly taken aback by how seriously she took the situation. He felt awkward. He himself had long since forgotten about his own desire. Then he simply asked her to explain how exactly she had come into possession of the amulet. The girl immediately realized that she absolutely mustn't mention that strange cat statue. So she calmly lied that a man from the Setter clan had once visited her, and that it was he who had given her the amulet. The prince was surprised. Was that all? He also admitted that he'd wanted to give her the item from the very beginning. He said she truly deserved it, and he never regretted his decision for a moment. The man paused for thought. After all, the amulet was a family heirloom, passed down only within the imperial family. But now, for the first time in 100 years, it had found a new owner. The prince asked if she had brought it with her. When she confirmed it, he asked to see it. The girl carefully removed the amulet from the basket, feeling a slight tension. He looked down and saw that she had simply slipped the amulet into her pocket. He froze in amazement. Was that all she had done? Such behavior seemed almost shocking to him. The girl calmly explained that pockets were actually meant to be put in. The prince's surprise only grew. He couldn't believe her simplicity. He noted to himself that perhaps only such straightforward and slightly strange people could truly possess such powerful amulets. After a short pause, he said that he wanted to ask her one important question, and his gaze became more serious, as if the decision had already been made. The prince asked her if she had even the slightest desire to give this amulet to someone else, perhaps as a gift. For example, he suggested that she consider the idea of presenting this valuable amulet to the imperial family, and not to the Marquis of Alden, as was perhaps planned? The girl was confused and seemed genuinely shocked. Then the prince realized she apparently hadn't even suspected that Marquis Alden was planning to give the amulet to the emperor. It was supposed to be an exchange, a gift of a powerful magical item, and in return, full rights to trade magical goods throughout the empire. After this, the prince asked what she thought about this, whether she was ready to take part in such a proposal. He asked if she would like to give the amulet to the imperial family and thereby receive support from Marquis Alden to raise her position. The girl was at a loss for words. She seemed to have lost the confidence she had previously felt, unsure of what to say or how to act. The prince thought her confidence seemed to have evaporated. This meant that persuading her would be easier than he expected. But perhaps he should approach her from a different angle, through her friend. He remembered that the girl had a friend from the Alden family. He then asked if she was willing to sacrifice the amulet for the sake of this friend. And then Velida surfaced in Margaret's memory. She hadn't done anything bad to her. And Margaret realized, you shouldn't make decisions based on others. You should follow your heart. Her friend had said these words to her before, calling Margaret not just her favorite heroine, but her true treasure, like someone she was afraid of losing. Then Margaret confidently declared that she disagreed. After all, she was the owner of the amulet, meaning it was up to her to decide what to do with it and who had access to it. She also emphasized that Marquis Alden has no right to dispose of the amulet without her consent, since he has neither moral nor formal right to do so. But with this approach, her friend, who also belongs to the Alden house, may experience difficulties and unnecessary suspicions from those around them. Despite this, Margaret assured her that the girl would support her. Whatever she decided, her friend would remain by her side and would not betray her. After all, she always supports Velida in return, regardless of the circumstances, thereby demonstrating their deep connection and loyalty. The prince finally understood. His friend hadn't been a pretext for handing over the amulet to the Aldens. On the contrary, she had become the support that had allowed Margaret to stand firm. It was the encouragement that allowed her to defy expectations. He was amazed that such a kind girl could become friends with Alden's daughter. He thought it was all funny, and he really liked the choice Margaret had made, as it was much braver than it seemed. Moreover, he came to the conclusion that perhaps the lady was not going to do what was expected of her at all, but wanted to do everything in her own way. He wondered if she was planning to set a trap for that impudent and unpleasant Marquis Alden to put him in his place. At that moment, Velida was sitting in the garden cafe. She was patiently waiting for her friend, whom she had arranged to meet here, in this cozy place. She thought that Margaret should have returned by now, and she was a little worried that something might have happened on the way or in the conversation with those who could interfere. Velida suddenly looked up from her book and noticed a carriage pull up outside the mansion. When the door opened, Margaret stepped out gracefully, confident and elegant. A minute later, she heard a surprised murmur. Servants and passers-by began whispering. The imperial carriage had arrived in the city, but no one recognized the girl inside. Everyone looked at her with admiration, so refined and elegant, clearly of noble birth. And all this heightened the mystery of her appearance in such a magnificent carriage. Margaret, beaming with joy, came forward, waved her hand lightly, and called out to Velida, as if there was no rank or ceremony between them, only friendship. Velida couldn't help but smile and asked curiously how her trip had gone, jokingly calling her Mrs. Rabbit to tease her old friend. Margaret snorted in response and said that she was not a rabbit at all. And Velida, still smiling, assured that she was just joking and did not mean anything bad at all. In another, less conspicuous carriage, Noah Elsius was sitting at the same time. His gaze was directed forward, but at some point he suddenly perked up. He leaned forward slightly and ordered the coachman to stop right there without giving any reason, but in such a tone that the latter did not dare to object. Everything changed the moment he saw two girls at the entrance, especially the one in the light dress, who was laughing and talking animatedly. He suddenly realized he had urgent business nearby and decided it was worth staying. His gaze never left the girls for a second. Meanwhile, Margaret sighed quietly and admitted that she was a little upset. She wanted her friend to be with her at the reception. She still remembered the fragrant tea and soft cookies they had served her. It would be so nice if her friend could try them too. Velita was surprised that her friend had already thought everything through in advance. She even noted to herself that next time they could go somewhere together, it would be more fun and easier that way. Margaret smiled, and it was clear from her face that she wasn't worried. Velita felt relieved. The tension had disappeared. She'd been afraid of the reaction, but she shouldn't have been. Velita turned to Margaret, gathering herself. Before initiating the conversation she'd been putting off since early morning, she wanted to do one important thing first. She reached for the small bag, carefully unfolded it, and took out a strange object that seemed to pulsate when touched. The object turned out to be magical. Velita concentrated and activated it. The space around them shifted slightly. The air seemed to freeze, becoming denser. Margaret didn't expect this. She even froze, not immediately understanding what was happening. After all, she had never seen Velita use magical artifacts before. Velita explained that this object blocked all sounds from both outside and inside. Their conversation was now protected, and even the most sensitive ears wouldn't be able to detect anything. Margaret admitted she'd never seen anything like it. Velita calmly replied that she'd found it useful, and, although it wasn't quite right, she'd taken it from home. The conversation they were about to have was too important. Not a single soul could know what they would discuss in the next few minutes. It was impossible to even read his lips. Everything was so protected. So Velita didn't delay any longer and wanted to find out what had happened to that future ruler. Margaret admitted she felt a little uneasy at first. A slight sense of dread crept over her when he first appeared. The atmosphere was tense and unsettling. At first, he seemed like a real predator to her. He gave off an air of danger, but the longer the conversation went on, the more he reminded her of a lazy cat rather than a wild animal. She imagined him as a cat playing with a caught mouse, leisurely, with lazy pleasure, swatting it with his paw, as if delaying the moment when he would finish it off. This gave Margaret the feeling that he was enjoying the game itself. This had been his image from the very beginning of Guardian's Garden's development, and Margaret captured it perfectly. Velita decided to ask her friend if he had made any impression on her, if she had been even a little charmed by his manner of behavior. The friend noted with a smile that if the mouse the cat was playing with had been cute and good, she would have felt sorry for it. But since the mouse was infected, the hunt seemed appropriate to her. Of course, her friend wasn't referring to herself. Velita, with a slight smile, indicated that she'd gotten the hint and was perfectly grasping the essence of what was happening. From what was said, it became clear that he was trying to take control of the Aldens, and not just have fun. He had a specific plan and goal, which he was gradually realizing. Margaret confirmed this, and that was why he asked her directly if she would like to help set a trap for the Marquis of Alden. It all looked like a carefully planned move. She had already set a trap for him with the Entente, and adding anything more would certainly not satisfy him. This forced her to be cautious and consider all possible consequences. Therefore, the girl admitted that she is actually worried, and therefore has many different thoughts in her head that she cannot immediately put in their place. Margaret smiled, remembering her friend's words before the palace. She decided then that she would follow her heart and do everything her way. She added that, despite everything, she will definitely protect her friend Velita, and nothing will make her back down from this decision. Suddenly, they both turned sharply and noticed a slight commotion around them. People began whispering and paying attention to what was happening around them. They saw a man protesting, saying that they should not treat him in this way, but that it would be better to leave him alone and not disturb him. He stated that he simply wanted to sit quietly and did not intend to interfere in the affairs of others, hoping that he would be left alone to enjoy his time. Velita, noticing what was happening, instantly changed her expression as soon as she realized who exactly was at the center of all this commotion. It turned out to be Noah Elsius, the Archmage, who was immediately greeted by the waiter, who approached him and started a conversation. Velita didn't understand what exactly this man was doing there. The waiter, smiling, explained that it was a great honor to serve him and showed him to his chosen table. The man, noticing how the waiter treated him with respect, smiled back and remarked that it was indeed worth trying to do so in order to enjoy the moment, He also added that he found a place that he really liked and decided that it was quite suitable for spending time in such a cozy place. When the man noticed Noah looking at him, he immediately realized it was time to finish his meal. With a smile, he announced that he was finished and was about to leave the restaurant. Noah, in response, smiled and said that, in principle, he expected this. Everything was going according to plan, as it should have. Noah, meanwhile, had settled into a seat at the next table, right next to a group of girls, and was feeling a little strange, though it was hardly an unexpected turn of events. What were the chances that the man they both knew would be here? And that, thanks to his presence, Noah would be able to sit at this table next to them? Velita couldn't believe that all this was happening right now, and she wondered if it was connected to the events that had happened earlier, when she didn't yet know how the situation would develop. Turning to the girls, he politely apologized for any inconvenience and explained that he did not want to disturb them, but felt it necessary to apologize for interfering in their calm conversation. The man also added that for several years, no one paid any attention to him. But despite this, they were able to continue communicating and enjoying time in their circle. Even though they used magical devices, such conversations in the presence of the Archmage became dangerous. In any case, continuing the conversation here wasn't as safe as they would have liked. He also changed his tone slightly and explained that the magical device he had brought had a unique shape. He had never seen anything like it, and this caught his attention. He noticed that he had never even heard of such magical objects before and asked if he could be heard well at the moment, trying to figure out how clear everything was. He noted that these were probably protective domes that blocked out external sounds, and he could now confidently say that he knew how they worked and why they were needed. The main character immediately realized he understood everything, without even needing to explain. His simple perspective on the subject made it clear he was no ordinary person. She decided not to use the item anymore, realizing he'd immediately grasped its purpose. He'd likely figured it out the moment he saw it. The gentleman noticed that it resembled rare magical items that are rarely found and can be very valuable, which immediately caught his attention. He added that he had never seen anything like it before, and therefore wanted to take a closer look at it to understand what kind of magical device it was. The girl was extremely surprised. She realized that this could become a serious problem for her if he began to delve deeper into this subject. She confessed to Margaret that she had actually stolen the object, although the truth was that she had invented it with Oscar. But if he found out, she would be in trouble. Suddenly, Margaret began to explain that this was indeed a new product developed by her family. She emphasized that it was their own invention and was still being refined. Margaret explained that her friend had been involved in the creation of this item, but at the moment there are still many shortcomings that need to be addressed for improvement. He realized their words and, smiling, said that this was precisely why he hadn't noticed this obvious detail before. Everything became clear only now, when he finally grasped their meaning. He added that he would eagerly await the day this device went on sale. His voice sounded confident, as if he had already envisioned this moment in the future. He muttered something unintelligible, as if deciding he wouldn't disturb them any longer. They could now continue their conversation without his intervention, his role here now complete. He glanced at Velita, as if trying to discern something important in her face, but her expression clearly showed she was uncomfortable with his intense gaze. He began to suspect that the girl in the alley might have been her. It all came together in his head as he tried to unravel the mystery of what had happened back then. How he managed to find this out remained a mystery to him. He couldn't understand how he'd managed to notice such a detail that was hidden from most. He was so severely poisoned that even the most experienced healers couldn't help him. His body was weakened, and returning to normal seemed impossible. The girl suddenly realized that all she needed to do was relax a little, find her sweet spot, and everything would become easier. However, reality turned out to be more complicated than she thought. But suddenly, everything went wrong. The sweet spot simply flew out of her hands. She hadn't expected such a turn of events, and the moment turned out to be much more difficult than she imagined. The man, remembering the moment he was poisoned, felt a chill down his spine. He couldn't forget how his body resisted treatment, and how every step toward recovery was a struggle. The girl couldn't understand why her candy rolled specifically toward Noah's feet. It seemed strange and unpredictable, but she didn't know how to explain it. Everything that was happening was a mystery to her, especially why everything had ended up in Noah's favor. She couldn't find an explanation, though she intuitively felt there was something hidden there. Everything that was happening reminded him of a situation that had once happened in an alley when he found himself in similar circumstances, and he involuntarily recalled that moment. The man, smiling slightly, noted that a similar situation had happened a few days ago, and he already felt a little better than the first time. Velida, aware of her rudeness toward the Duke, immediately apologized. She knew her actions were inappropriate and was trying to make amends. The gentleman, holding back a smile, said that ladies should not do such things, and he himself, with dignity, picked up the fallen candy, returning the situation to a calmer channel. He added with a smile that it was just a small thing, not worth much attention, and it seemed that for him it was nothing more than a trifle. Remembering how angry he had been when he first encountered this, he noticed that now it only made him smile, because each time it became less important. The man wondered if there would be a third such situation, but the girl, not understanding what he was talking about, simply shook her head, clearly unwilling to continue the conversation. He then noted that there was no point in wasting energy thinking about it, because in reality, it was not particularly important and not worth worrying about. Soon he said that he had to go, and the slight smile on his face confirmed that the situation still did not leave him indifferent, despite the light joke. He added that if fate brought them together again, they would definitely meet. But he didn't draw attention to this, just winked slightly. The girl was stunned by what was happening, and a feeling of discontent instantly overwhelmed her. It was completely unexpected, and she couldn't understand how this could have happened. In a fit of anger, she couldn't restrain herself and cursed him, but suddenly a guy approached her and quietly told her not to say such harsh words. He pointed out to her that even without the protective dome, they could afford to discuss such things, and this became a strange moment for her. Velida, turning to the guy, said with displeasure that, despite everything, she was sure that the others thought almost the same thing about him. The guy noticed that they only think about it, but they can't stop themselves from voicing their thoughts out loud, which is not always useful, especially when it comes to important matters. The lady, picking up the mug, replied with a smile that she was trying to be careful. She wondered aloud, trying to figure out whether someone had really been trying to hide her from the Duke. He noted that it was best to avoid meeting the Duke so as not to attract his attention. He didn't believe that everything they were doing would be useless and hoped for better outcomes. It was unusual for him to show interest in his mistress. This behavior seemed odd, as he had previously ignored her and had always been reserved. Jerome Oliver, the cafe manager and a member of Velida's organization, was one of those who often helped out at her establishment. He was not only an assistant but also a key figure in her affairs. The lady wondered why he had suddenly become so interested. She couldn't figure out what had happened, but she felt it might have been due to his resentment toward the Aldens. It was highly likely that he recognized her, and that was what prompted him to pay such attention. But the lady herself wasn't sure why it happened now. At that moment, the chocolate bar fell unexpectedly. She couldn't understand why it happened at that precise moment. Everything that was happening seemed too strange and difficult to understand. The lady approached Jerome, asking him to sell the chocolates in rectangular shapes next time, rather than the usual ones. Her request was simple, but she felt a change was needed. Noah's new path might have dire consequences, but it would have been better if he had shown interest in her rather than Margaret. It would have been more beneficial to her plans. She approached Jerome with an important message. A ball would soon be held at the Imperial Palace, and there would be much talk. Jerome should listen carefully to what the guests were saying. After Noah left, they continued their conversation. Margaret revealed that the prince was organizing a ball to officially announce her ownership of the amulet. This ball was crucial for keeping Carlon in check. Her cafe, as always, would be the perfect place to eavesdrop on all the rumors and gossip surrounding the upcoming event. The lady said she had to go. She was ready to leave the cafe and continue her business, leaving everything as it was. She left the payment for the tea right on the table. quickly and without unnecessary words. As is often the case in her life, she always does everything automatically. The waiter couldn't help but be amazed every time. They were working for her, and she was paying for her tea like any other customer. He found this strange situation difficult to understand. The girl explained that it was called a Mobius strip. He didn't understand right away, but nevertheless, he listened, nodding his head, trying not to show his surprise. The waiter was perplexed, but the girl immediately reassured him. It wasn't important, and he didn't need to delve into the details of what she meant. She couldn't help but smile too. It was funny that he kept telling everyone she was his lover. It gave her some pleasure, even though she knew it was just a rumor. The waiter suddenly took her hand and kissed it. He did it so unexpectedly that even she didn't immediately realize what had happened, but he was sincere in his gesture. He noticed that she had actually been striving for this outcome herself. It was her desire to find herself in a situation where he would become her lover. Thanks to the rumors that had spread, she could now talk to him for long periods of time. And there was nothing unusual about it. Everything seemed like a normal development. Therefore, he had to remain in this role of lover until the very end. He understood that he could not change the course of events and had to act according to the situation. As he escorted her to the carriage, the girl said he'd really played his part well today. She appreciated his actions as if they were part of some plan. She added that if Noah showed up at that location, the waiter should notify her immediately. This information was crucial, and she knew she had to be prepared for any eventuality. Jerome paused, sensing something was wrong. He sensed a strange tension in the air, suggesting there was more going on here than just ordinary events. She was so different from the Velida Alden he knew. The change that had come over her came as a real shock to him, and he couldn't understand what had caused it. When she returned home, her father started yelling at her. He asked her if she realized who she was and why she was acting as if she didn't understand anything. He accused her of knowing perfectly well where Margaret's amulet was and not telling him. This deeply upset him. He felt betrayed. Her brother was furious and told her not to try to lie to him. His words were so furious that Velida felt her insides clench with fear. They pressed her to explain why Margaret had met with the prince a few days earlier. It was an important event, and they couldn't just ignore it. Velida was stunned. She'd only just returned home, and already she was being interrogated. It seemed the news of the upcoming imperial ball had greatly excited everyone around her. If they managed to discover the amulet's true purpose, they will lose interest in capturing it. However, if it remains a secret, their desire will not wane. They don't understand the whole situation, and they irresponsibly and naively pursue their goals without even understanding what's going on. It's like a mindless desire without reason. The girl confidently declared that she saw no reason to talk about this amulet. They already had enough wealth without it to worry about such trifles. Unable to bear it any longer, her father shouted loudly that she was being completely unreasonable and should shut up immediately. His patience was at its limit, and he couldn't hold back any longer. Velida, without looking at her father, calmly turned away and said she didn't understand why this particular amulet had become so important now. She was certain it all happened by Margaret's will. The father was furious. He couldn't understand why the princess knew about this if it was supposed to remain a secret, but he was still certain the emperor had entrusted the prince with this task. The father, realizing that the situation was getting out of control, decided to organize a reception in honor of Margaret to congratulate her on this significant event and show his attention. The father was horrified, and the Velida's brother turned out to be incredibly angry. His feelings were as stormy as his father's, which only worsened the atmosphere of tension in the house. Their anger was likely great, as this meant the breaking of the contract that governed the transfer of the right to trade magical items. Such an event could not go without consequences. If Margaret shows up at a reception, all eyes will be on her. She's curious about how the crowd will react to her presence, eager to see their surprise and admiration. The girl bowed politely and said she felt she had said all she wanted to. Now it seemed the moment had come for her to leave, and she intended to end this conversation. There were only 10 days left until the important reception, and the time was approaching inexorably. Everything had to be prepared in a short time, and every moment counted for success. The main focus was on preparing a dress that would highlight her elegance, as well as gathering information in the cafe, which allowed her to stay informed about all the events. The main character's appearance had to be simply stunning, and the preparations went exactly according to plan. Everything went as it should, so that she looked her best on the day of the reception. 10 days passed, and the long-awaited moment arrived, the day of receptions at the Imperial Palace. This was an event that would determine the future, and all the preparations proved crucial. Margaret entered the room, immediately calling her friend. They hadn't seen each other for a long time, and the moment promised to be full of emotion, anticipation, and excitement. When the girl turned around, she was simply delighted by how her friend looked. Every movement, every word, emphasized how much she had changed in that time. Margaret was truly irresistible today. Her appearance, exquisite features, and noble bearing gave her an unearthly charm, creating a striking impression on everyone around her. Her friend asked her how she looked, uninhibitedly admiring her. Margaret was visibly embarrassed, but her eyes showed genuine joy at such a warm assessment of her appearance. This soft pink dress perfectly accented her blonde hair, adding even more luxury and shine. It emphasized her femininity and sophistication. The outfit was completed with stunning lace, and the bright red shoes became the main detail, emphasizing Margaret's exquisite style and impeccable taste, giving her entire look a complete look. The design, which was part of the game's original concept, looked even more impressive in real life. Everything seemed much more vibrant and colorful than in the virtual environment. It was stunning. Velita, seeing her friend, approached her and said with a smile that she looked incredible, like a real star. Her words genuinely pleased her, because her friend truly did look beautiful. At this point, Marchioness Olbia Aboden stood up and expressed her gratitude to the Velita. She admitted that thanks to her, she was able to see her daughter Margaret in such a gorgeous dress. It was a miracle. Suddenly, her father's voice rang out, declaring that all of this was the result of his ambition and effort. He spoke with such confidence, as if it were his own contribution to the situation. Everyone listened attentively. Everyone present was a little taken aback, as no one expected to hear such words from him. It came as a surprise, and everyone immediately began to ponder the meaning of his words. Father continued, saying he'd been very worried because Margaret didn't have a proper outfit for such an important event. Velita had given her this dress, and he didn't know how to thank her. Velita reminded them that they were friends, and if it really bothered them, she would ask them to make such a gift for her as soon as the right moment came. Velita suggested that it would be better for them to leave early so as not to be late, since it was time to take care of time and not waste precious minutes. Margaret happily climbed into the carriage, anticipating that this evening would be the most memorable of her life. She could not wait for what awaited her ahead. Naturally, the path to the palace would not be easy. The road ahead would be long and tiring, but they were ready to overcome all difficulties because the goal was worth it. Suddenly, the carriage stopped abruptly, and Velita looked at her friend with alarm, realizing that something unexpected had happened that required immediate attention. She reassured her friend, assuring her that there was no need to worry and that she should only think about the good things, because everything would be fine and they would overcome any difficulties along the way. They will travel through these dangerous lands, and despite all the difficulties, they will be able to get out of there unharmed and will soon find themselves in safety. She advised them not to open the windows and draw the curtains so as not to attract unnecessary attention, since their trip was not so safe. It would all be over soon. The road was really dangerous, but they believed that they could get through all the trials and complete this journey without any serious problems. According to the plot, an attack occurred on the way to the palace, which created considerable difficulties and put everyone in danger, but they continued to move forward. Most likely, this was all planned by Carlin. He tried to steal the amulet, which was quite typical of him, but she had already foreseen this development. Anticipating potential dangers, she asked the twins for help in advance. She also warned Kucher of the potential threat, hoping that her preparedness would pay off. Though she tried to remain calm, it couldn't be said that her anxiety had gone away. It was a good thing she had been prepared for this turn of events. In the end, she decided there was no point in panicking, and everything would be all right. Everything would be resolved, no matter what, and she felt she was in control. The knight warned her that he would try to make his way through the dangers, but the carriage could shake violently. He advised her to be careful to avoid injury. Velida suspected it might have been Rachel and Roxa, the twins from the Tang clan. Perhaps they had arrived in time to help, but she still couldn't be sure. The twins' arrival was timely, but she couldn't fully relax. She could only hope that everything would work out, though the anxiety still lingered. Suddenly, a new task appeared before her eyes. The table appeared suddenly, a reminder that she couldn't relax when the game moved to a new stage. The screen displayed the objective: repel the attack, eliminate the bandits with the help of your allies, and earn a badge. The mission seemed serious and important. When she saw the task, she was shocked. Something similar had happened in the game, but now it was happening in reality. A multitude of questions arose in her head. However, she still couldn't understand why failure or punishment could lead to such dire consequences. Death. It was difficult to accept. She wasn't the main character, and so she couldn't understand why death was so close. Everything that was happening seemed alien to her, as if it didn't concern her. Although, of course, she didn't want Margaret to die in her place. Still, if she had to die, it would be better if it weren't her. A sad thought, but alas, a reality. I needed to calm down. If the attack was successful, they would kill all the witnesses. It was unlikely anyone would survive, and that was probably their main goal. Rachel and Roxa are protecting them, and that gives them a chance of survival. But there's no need to worry about that right now. They need to focus on other things first. Unlike the game, where items are awarded automatically after battling bandits, the situation here is completely different. It's unclear whether the twins will be able to find the required icon, or whether they know its importance. Of course, they probably don't know that. Her job is to warn them so they can find this sign when they get to the right place. It's important they don't miss it. They finally arrived and were able to disembark. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief, calming down a bit, though the nervousness still lingered. It was a moment of relief, not victory. They were completely exhausted, barely able to stand. Everyone was at the limit of their strength, and this was understandable, given the gravity of what had happened. The knight behind them pointed, explaining that there had been 2 attacks. The first had been repelled by the prince's men, and the second by the twins. This information was important and demanded attention. One attack was repelled by the prince's men, and the second by the twins. The knight emphasized this, explaining that the situation was far more complex than one might think. She was completely shocked to hear there were 2 of them. Expressing concern, she asked him to tell the twins to immediately begin searching for clues that would help them identify the attackers. She hoped that at least some clues could lead to a solution, as this was the only way to learn more about the attackers and their motives, as well as possible connections with other participants. At some point, it became clear that one thing was certain. If the prince had indeed sent his men to protect Margaret, then his path had opened up, and this had opened up new prospects. The outcome of the game now depended on how the events of the attack unfolded, and everything that happened could affect the overall course of the game, its ending, and even the fates of the main characters. If she hadn't managed to fight off the attackers, Umar insisted that if the enemy had succeeded, she would have lost the amulet, and perhaps even been kidnapped by Luther, who would have held her captive, hiding her from everyone. However, since the prince sent his men, who managed to intervene in time and stop the robbers, this spoke of his clear interest in Margaret and his readiness to protect her. Noah's goal was clearly connected to Velida, and aside from Luther, there was still one other important character, the head of the knightly order, who could play a key role in what was happening. There is a high probability that they will meet him today at the reception from which the main story will begin, and now every wrong step can seriously affect the entire carefully thought-out plan. In such a situation, she understood that she needed to act quickly and gather her strength, because delay could jeopardize not only her plans, but also the lives of everyone involved in this story. Velida turned to her friend and said with a slight smile that it was time to smile and get ready, because they were running out of time. They had to go so as not to miss the important part of the meeting. This evening promised to be the best day of Margaret's life, and Velida would do everything to ensure that nothing would interfere with this happy moment. She was ready to guarantee that everything would go perfectly. When they entered the hall, Margaret was visibly agitated. Her face betrayed her anxiety, though outwardly she tried to remain calm. Every movement betrayed her tension. Margaret's friend, noticing her anxiety, spoke softly to her. She advised her to think of something cheerful that would distract her from her worries and help her relax a little. If she continued to worry, her friend told her to just think about a funny situation, and then everything would become easier. The ease was supposed to come with simple thoughts. A friend suggested Margaret imagine a cat striking a snake in the head with its paw, causing it to instantly lose consciousness. This image might amuse her. Or she might think that the prince had suddenly turned into a cat and was happily playing with this snake on the ground, creating an unpredictable picture of fun and chaos all around. After these words, a smile appeared on Margaret's face. She couldn't understand how Velida had come up with such a thought, but at some point she began to laugh genuinely. Everyone around began to speculate about who this mysterious pink-haired lady could be. They hadn't yet found any clear clues as to her true identity. Perhaps this girl was some unknown princess from another kingdom. Everyone began to wonder who she was and what her purpose was here. This became a pressing question for everyone. Velida, for her part, understood that her task today was to support Margaret like a faithful servant. All attention had to be focused solely on her to avoid disaster. However, despite all her worries, Velida understood that worrying would do no good. She offered Margaret some wine to help her relax and relieve her tension. Margaret thanked him, expressing her appreciation, but her thoughts were interrupted when someone suddenly addressed her. She glanced to the side and immediately realized someone wanted to get her attention. When they turned around, Luther, Velida's brother, stood before them. He was clearly pleased to see her, his face breaking into a wide smile. This was a pleasant surprise for Margaret. She hadn't expected such a meeting. Luther, delighted to see her, enthusiastically remarked that Margaret looked absolutely stunning today. He remarked on her beautiful appearance, which immediately attracted the attention of everyone present. Margaret gratefully accepted the compliment, noting that thanks to Velida, she had managed to get here without any difficulty. She thanked everyone for their help and expressed her appreciation for their support. She also couldn't resist adding that, although they knew each other, they weren't close enough for him to call her by her first name. Margaret asked him to understand her desire to maintain distance and respect her personal boundaries. Luther was somewhat taken aback by her words, not expecting such directness. However, Velida, observing the situation, smiled. She knew that Margaret had become much closer to the prince, and now everything was changing. Velida also noted that the journey here hadn't been easy, adding with a slight smile that that was exactly what they'd experienced along the way. Sometimes life throws us challenges that are difficult to overcome. She couldn't help but notice how their carriage, trying to avoid an obstacle, nearly overturned. The incident left a lasting impression, but no one was injured, and everyone soon calmed down. Velida's brother, watching the scene, was clearly aware of the incident. His reaction left no doubt. He was aware of it and perhaps worried about his sister's safety, but he didn't show his concern. One of the attacks turned out to be Luther's doing, and now the lady was certain of it. She understood perfectly well that this was no accident, but a carefully planned operation. Luther always knew how to conceal his intentions. She expressed gratitude to her friend, noting that without her, poor Margaret could have died. The carriage would have overturned, and the consequences would have been much more serious. Velida was very grateful for her intervention. Velida also couldn't help but notice her father's condition. She noticed that he seemed tired and constantly busy. Clearly, these last few days had been difficult for him, and this couldn't help but make her worried. She wondered if perhaps she could help him, try to lift his spirits. But knowing his nature, she understood that he was again consumed by his own affairs, and it wasn't easy for him to accept help, even from her. However, he couldn't even allow himself to show irritation around Margaret. He was always too reserved to reveal his true feelings, especially when she, his precious daughter, was nearby. Velida was certain that they shouldn't have started this entire complicated process with the Imperial and Empress's visit. It had only gotten them into even more trouble, and she now doubted the wisdom of such a step. At that moment, the Crown Prince entered the hall. His appearance attracted the attention of everyone present, and he immediately declared his pleasure at seeing everyone there, despite the circumstances, and thanked them for their participation in such an important event. He was genuinely pleased that they were all able to attend this event. Despite the outward difficulties, the prince did not hide his gratitude for the attention and respect shown to them. He appreciated it. The prince also noted that an important event had recently occurred in their empire. This joyful event, he said, was destined to change many things in the near future. It was a significant step forward for the entire empire. He explained that perhaps none of them knew of the ancient amulet of Sitar. This artifact was vital to the empire, and now the prince wanted to share the new details he had learned. The prince noted that the Sitar amulet, which had been key to the rise of the empire 100 years ago, had finally found a new owner. This treasure was extremely valuable, and its arrival in their ranks meant new opportunities for the empire. He intended to introduce this man to her right then and there, without waiting a second. This decision seemed dictated not only by determination, but also by a desire to demonstrate his confidence in front of everyone. Margaret glanced at her friend, and Velida, noticing her anxiety, suggested thinking about the cat, its paws, and then imagining how it hits the snake's head with them, which eased the tension a little. These words truly helped Margaret relax, and a smile finally lit up her face. The fear and anxiety receded, and she felt much better. The atmosphere around her changed. As she was about to leave, Luther tried to stop her, but Velida quickly intervened. She calmly told him to control himself and not interfere with her decision. His actions were unnecessary. Velida warned Luther to remain calm, as his attempts to interfere would only make matters worse. Her tone was stern, and he realized he needed to stop. Luther, in addition to telling his father that Margaret had become the new owner of the amulet, also staged an attack on her. He thought Velida wouldn't detect his actions, but he was wrong. She noted that Margaret knew nothing yet, and that if Luther wanted his sister to remain silent, he should refrain from taking any further steps. After all, Velida had seen perfectly well what was really happening. Velida added that Margaret believes her every word, and that's how she gains trust, without proof, simply through her confidence. This is, in essence, her strength and her way of manipulating the situation. Velida advised him to keep a low profile and not cause any more trouble, because if he continued, she would immediately tell Margaret about the spy he kissed in the Merchant Guild. The consequences would be severe. Luther continued to hope that he could win Margaret's heart effortlessly, relying solely on his luck. But such thoughts only put him at a disadvantage, revealing his weakness and underestimation. That's why, despite his efforts, he still hadn't achieved what he wanted for 3 years. His approach proved too naive, and even Velida couldn't help but sneer at his failures. At that moment, Margaret of Bodin's name was announced. It was significant, and everyone around her immediately fell silent, awaiting her reaction. This could be a turning point, and everyone was waiting for her decision. The crown prince approached her and announced that she had become the new owner of the amulet. This was an important step, and everyone needed to know that her role in these events was now changing. "May the words of the treasure always be with her," he said, emphasizing the importance of this moment. It was not just an act of recognition, but an entire ritual symbolizing her new status. The girl smiled softly, noticing that the bright prince was grinning back. His gaze was filled with a certain warmth, and there was something very attractive and mysterious about it. Margaret thanked the Velida for helping her release her tension. Without her, she might have remained anxious, unsure of how to handle the situation. Velida, in turn, gave her a beautiful dress and reassured her. Without her support, Margaret would have found herself in a very awkward situation, as she would have felt uncomfortable at that moment. However, Velida disagreed with this view. She believed her friend could have performed well without her help, since everything was decided by her own strength and determination, and she had only contributed a little. Margaret will soon be inundated with marriage proposals, and all eyes will be on her. She will be forced to make a choice that will be a crucial step in her life. Velida warned her not to look at anyone around her. Margaret should choose someone she truly liked, not someone who seemed best suited to society. Soon, Luther, Velida's brother, approached them again. He looked closely at Margaret and, as if searching for the right moment, asked her a question that immediately caught her attention. Luther inquired how much longer Margaret planned to spend her time communicating exclusively with Velida. His question was not without a touch of irony, but his voice also betrayed concern for her future actions. After all, Margaret, as the evening's leading lady, had to showcase her best qualities, including on the dance floor. She was obliged to demonstrate her skill and confidence. He noticed that she didn't have a partner, and taking this into account, he offered to be one for her first dance, readily supporting her at that moment. The girls couldn't hide their surprise. They were simply stunned to hear such a ridiculous remark from him, and it all happened right in front of everyone. He also did not forget to watch his sister's reaction, carefully observing how she would perceive what was happening, since her opinion was important to him. It was perhaps the worst dance invitation that could have ever happened, and the moment itself felt completely awkward and strange for everyone present. After this, the Crown Prince approached them and noticed that Margaret still seemed to have not decided with whom she would dance, and this was clearly evident from her appearance. He added with a slight smile that perhaps he had a chance and that he was willing to offer his company to share this moment with her. He offered, in a reserved but warm tone, that if she agreed, he would be happy to perform her first dance with her, becoming her partner in this important event. The prince noted that he did not want to appear rude, emphasizing that he was not trying to take this moment away from anyone, as such an opportunity only happens once. He also added that he would be honored if she chose him as her first dance partner, and he would gladly fulfill that role. The prince, with a slight bow of his head, said that it would be an honor for him if she would agree to dance with him that evening, considering it an important moment for her. Margaret, smiling, replied that it would indeed be an honor for her, and she was glad to accept his offer, despite all the tension of the situation. Everyone present was in complete shock. They couldn't believe their eyes, realizing that before them stood not only the prince, but also the owner of the amulet, which lifted the entire atmosphere. They looked like the perfect couple, and Velida couldn't resist asking Luther to calm his expression, as everything that was happening required patience. Velida pointed out how harmonious they looked together, noting that no one in the room could deny it. Everyone present felt their closeness immediately apparent. Her brother irritably reminded her that he'd already told her to shut up. However, Velida couldn't resist commenting, noting that, unlike the others, the prince intended to take the amulet from Margaret. Despite this, Velida was confident that the prince would not stand aside and would not allow anything to happen without his participation, especially when it came to such an important artifact as this amulet. Enraged, Luther lost his temper and declared that it was thanks to this amulet that their ancestors had been able to gain power 100 years earlier. He couldn't allow their family to fall into subjection again. Velida, confident in her opinion, added that the imperial family would likely support the idea of the marriage, since such unions always strengthen positions, even if the situation is controversial. Luther, consumed by rage, lost control and struck his sister. His fury was so intense that Velida lost her footing and fell to the floor, which only intensified his rage. The blow was powerful enough to cause blood to flow from Velida's mouth. She felt a sharp pain, but despite it, she tried to gather her strength and not give in to panic. Fortunately, Margaret, who was nearby, didn't notice the incident. Everything happened so quickly that she didn't have time to notice, and Velida was able to hide her pain. Velida noticed that Luther had not only made himself look like an ignorant idiot, but had also humiliated her in front of everyone present. This only added fuel to her rage. Her words cut like a knife, especially in such an important place where everyone was present. She couldn't help but notice that Luther had not only shown his aggression, but had also caused quite a scene among the people. He shouldn't worry too much. She's not going to reveal everything he's done, even though she has enough information to make him uncomfortable. However, she doesn't intend to do that. She whispered softly in his ear that she had something far more terrifying to say to him in return. It might change his perception of what was happening. She informed him that he had orchestrated the attack on Margaret in order to marry her. This shocked him, but she was certain he didn't realize the full extent of his actions. Father plans to give the amulet to the Emperor if he manages to retrieve it. Therefore, He wonders whether he will be able to obtain permission to marry Margaret if this amulet ends up in his possession. He's naive and simple-minded, like a young dog who aspires to be the leader of the pack but doesn't understand all the subtleties of being in the lead role. In reality, he lacks knowledge and experience. After that, she said it was time for her to leave. Ultimately, it was he who told his father, helped the prince get closer to Margaret, and now he cannot escape responsibility for his actions. Margaret stepped out onto the balcony, trying to figure out what to do with the pin. She didn't know how to cope with the pain she was feeling, as resolving the situation required even more effort. Magic is certainly useful, but it's not as effective as a heating pad. Despite this, it still had a significant impact, even if it didn't always produce the results she'd hoped for. Luther is terrible. She told him the truth to his face, and he simply responded with a slap and a spit. His reaction was unacceptable, and she was outraged by his behavior. He was insane. The situation was so out of control that she felt he simply had to stop himself, otherwise he would consume everyone around him. His actions were destructive to everyone. Suddenly, she heard someone laughing behind her. Turning around, she saw the person laughing apologize to her, as if trying to make up for their inappropriate reaction to the situation. Velita was startled by the sound of footsteps behind her. Turning around, she spotted the man who had said he hadn't meant to laugh at her, and his words sounded sincere and not mocking. She recognized the man immediately, for he was familiar. He was someone she had seen many times, and his face left no doubt, although at that moment she was slightly stunned. Of course, it was Graham Cordis, the head of the Knightly Order. She remembered his stern demeanor and masculine face. And, as it turned out, he not only knew her, but had heard all her angry words. Graham apologized, explaining he hadn't meant to scare her. He said he'd been worried about her condition and, hearing her discontent, had decided to keep an eye on her to make sure she was okay. He hadn't expected to overhear her frank statements, and perhaps because of this he acted a little frivolously. But his apology sounded sincere, and she could sense it. Velita smiled, realizing Graham was being polite and respectful. She admitted it was her fault, as she couldn't respond to him in front of others. She was grateful for his concern. Graham came closer, expressing gratitude for her kind words. He also asked if she was okay, clearly concerned about her condition after their brief conversation. The lady understood what he was talking about. He noticed that she had a small wound on her face that clearly couldn't have gone unnoticed. She immediately realized he couldn't have missed it. Velita confirmed that there was indeed a wound, but it was small. A small spot on her face, which, as it turned out, wasn't as dangerous as it first appeared. To always be prepared for the unexpected, the Alden family carried a small vial of the potion. It was an integral part of their daily life, especially when it came to safety. Graham became intrigued and asked if she really did carry the potion with her at all times. He knew how important it was to have it on hand, and his question sounded genuinely curious. Velita, smiling, confirmed his words. Of course, she always carried it with her. It was necessary, especially when she often had to travel through dark and dangerous streets. She usually passed the potion on to the twins when they were injured while protecting her. This was necessary, as they were always there when she needed help, and they were often in danger. After that, he asked the lady if she was afraid. He wanted to understand whether she was afraid of what might happen to her in the future. She didn't understand what exactly she was afraid of. He explained that perhaps she was afraid of living in such a dangerous and unpredictable family, where there was always risk. However, the girl replied with a smile that if there was no way out of this situation, there was no need to worry. However, she noted that the situation had improved slightly at the moment. The twins and other servants helped her to put a spoke in Carlin's wheels, preventing her from moving forward and getting what she wanted. Graham was shocked by the cruel treatment she was receiving, but despite this, she continued to smile, which he found incredible. She didn't quite understand what he was talking about, but he just said that it didn't matter, and then asked if she already had a partner. The girl was shocked by this question. It was so unexpected that she didn't know how to react. She replied that this was not true, that she did not have a partner, but her words sounded with some confusion and even slight doubt. Then Graham approached her with a proposal. Would she agree to dance with him, at least one dance, to distract herself a little? She was confused. Inside, she already felt agreement, but verbally she still said that she was sorry, but she wasn't dancing. She really wanted to apologize to him, because her refusal was more a consequence of her own internal conflict than a desire to offend him. All this happened because Graham was one of the two normal young men in the game, and the girl felt that he absolutely had to meet Margaret. The girl noticed she was feeling a little dizzy after the blow, which added to the discomfort, especially when she tried to stay on her feet. Her head felt heavy, but she tried to focus on what was happening. At that moment, Noah approached her. He told her she should rest and not continue standing for so long, as her condition clearly required attention and time to recover. His words were gentle and caring. The girl was completely shocked when she noticed him. Unsure how to react, she felt a strange sense of uncertainty. The situation was completely unexpected and unbelievable. Noah Elsius stood before her, and she couldn't understand how he had ended up here. He was the same man she knew, but his presence in this place was a mystery to her. Noah Elsius seemed to appear out of nowhere, and each time his appearance was just as unexpected. Each time, the girl became increasingly lost in his mystery and his unusual ability to be everywhere. Caught between the two characters, the girl felt extremely uncomfortable. It was like being stuck in a moment where it was impossible to choose a side or simply escape what was happening. Indeed, something was clearly wrong with them. They were both acting strangely, as if they were hiding secrets that could alter their behavior. This only heightened the tension. If you think about it, their knight clearly had no respect for either the rulers or those who serve the snake. This behavior added even more mystery and anxiety to the girl's situation. However, if they were going to fight, she definitely didn't want to watch it. Seeing them clash would be too unpleasant and dangerous, especially considering how quickly the situation could spiral out of control. The girl decided it would be best to simply leave, rather than be part of this tense moment. She greeted the Duke but immediately excused herself, feeling she shouldn't stay there. The apology was made immediately because the girl felt her presence there only made the situation worse. She knew she had better leave this place to avoid becoming part of something she couldn't control. Noah, noticing her state, turned to her and said that if she was dizzy, she shouldn't bow so hard. He suggested she ease the movement so as not to aggravate her discomfort, thus showing concern. She should have been more careful, as the situation could have led to undesirable consequences. The girl couldn't understand what had happened to him, why he had become so attentive and caring. He was the same man who had caused her one disappointment after another, and now he had suddenly begun to show a strange kindness. It seemed completely absurd to her. His actions were one big red flag. She was grateful for his concern and attention, but still decided she should apologize. She was a little tired and needed rest, so she asked for some time to herself. Just as she was about to leave, Graham approached her. He asked if she was truly feeling okay, if her health had worsened, and wanted to know what was going on. Graham came even closer and informed her that she might feel weak and even faint on the way. He offered to accompany her so she wouldn't be left without assistance until she reached the break room. She didn't want him to accompany her, even if he was sincere in his intentions. If he was going to leave, it would be better if he went to Margaret without worrying about her. Of course, she didn't say this out loud, lest she offend him. Instead, she thanked him for the offer, declaring that she could manage on her own without his help and would be able to get to her destination. Suddenly, the Duke stopped her, saying that if she was in trouble, he, as the only noble knight, could offer his assistance. He insisted that he should be the one guarding this place, not simply worrying about her. Graham addressed the Duke and informed him that magic was strictly forbidden here, adding that any violation of this rule would have consequences. His voice was full of confidence and determination. But then Noah, with a smirk, declared that if Graham had any complaints about his actions, he could safely complain to the Emperor himself. It was a hint about who truly wielded influence in the Empire. Graham, unable to contain himself, sarcastically asked Noah if his tongue was bothering him, hinting at his excessive chatter, which he considered completely out of place. There was a hint of irritation in his words. Noah, unfazed, replied that Gray could check for himself if his tongue was bothering him. He spoke with an expression as if each answer were part of a game he was happily playing. Velita realized the moment had come for her to leave. She knew that if open conflict broke out between them, she too would suffer the consequences. Now was the time to escape, before things got out of hand. She sensed that if they started arguing in earnest, it wouldn't just be them who would suffer. She could end up in the middle of it all, and she didn't like that at all. So she decided to act quickly. Noah, noticing how hard the lady, who was already in no good shape, was having conversations, assumed she was tired of all this arguing. He didn't want to bother her any further, knowing she needed relief. He suggested they could walk together, and he was willing to help her with that. With these words, he took a step forward, as if to show he was ready to take responsibility and support her in this difficult moment. After his proposal, Velita realized she now had no excuse to run away. She had no choice, and she felt her will begin to succumb to his pressure. She extended her hand to him, and together they left the scene of this tense conversation. It was a logical decision for her, though inside she felt a multitude of conflicting emotions. As he parted, Graham expressed his wish for her wound to heal as quickly as possible. His words were short, but they sounded sincere, as if he truly wished her a speedy recovery. He continued to hope that when they met next, her condition would improve and she would feel much better than she did now, freed from the burden of painful sensations. Velita was stunned when he kissed her hand. She felt awkward and even a little embarrassed, not expecting such a gesture from him, which was completely unexpected and new. With a slight smile, she promised that they would certainly meet again, hoping that this meeting wouldn't be their last. As they said goodbye, her heart beat faster with unspoken emotions and a strange excitement. Turning around, she prepared to walk with Noah, walking away with him until her thoughts were completely occupied with the process of what had just happened between them. She wasn't entirely sure how to act. Velita was completely confused, unsure of what to do next. Her emotions were in complete chaos, and she couldn't decide how best to handle this difficult situation. With Noah by her side, she'd return, and all eyes would be on her, which couldn't help but worry her. She knew it would lead to conversation, and her presence would attract everyone's attention. She didn't want to be noticed by her father, Carlon. The less she was seen, the calmer she felt, because she had absolutely no need to draw unnecessary attention to herself. Velita told Noah she could walk there herself. It was more convenient for her than attracting unwanted attention. She didn't want anyone to notice her or start commenting on her presence. Noah, observant as ever, noticed traces of magic on her cheeks. He realized she'd drunk the potion that left the mark, confirming her condition and her need for extra care. However, he knew the potion wouldn't completely heal her right away. It wouldn't produce instant results, but he was ready to help her if she wanted. Velita, however, noted that she could handle it when she returned home. She also emphasized that even if he hadn't decided to help her, she could have managed without him. But she was still grateful for his concern, even if she wasn't always willing to accept help from others. He could not understand why this was so, and was surprised to notice that, in fact, he was just an angel, ready to sacrifice something in order to save a dying man. Noah teases her now, remembering their first meeting in that tight alley, when it all started, and she looked so vulnerable and confused. The girl assured him that she was not trying to deny what was happening, but there was no point in his help, because everything had already been decided long ago, and their paths did not cross. Noah stated that she had never agreed to help, and that day she knew exactly what words she needed to say to avoid further complications. He hadn't heard anything like it in a long time, and his face remained inscrutable as he addressed her, as if she were just part of a vague and confusing past. But the girl just threw up her hands and said that she didn't understand what he was even talking about, because she just wanted to save the stranger, without thinking about the consequences. It didn't matter to her who was standing in front of her. The only thing that mattered was helping the person in trouble and resolving the situation without any unnecessary hesitation. At that moment, he abruptly pressed her against the wall, asking if she really didn't recognize him, didn't sense who was really hiding behind his appearance. It seemed to him that after that first meeting, he never left her mind, and she unconsciously began to think about him, remembering him in the most unexpected moments. And now he noticed that he was wondering when she would realize that in fact she was his only savior, that she had changed his life so much. But the girl understood it was a lie, because he couldn't be her benefactor. He was simply using her, manipulating her kindness, and this was obvious from the very beginning. Velita couldn't understand what had driven him to such actions. It all seemed unnecessary to her, especially considering that his actions clearly made no sense and were too provocative. She noted that he must have known about venomous snakes and their dangers. It was obvious, and most likely that was why he felt such hatred for the Aldens. He hinted that she might be about to bite him right now, as if recalling the incident when she ran away from him. It all sounded strange and frightening. He offered to let her reveal the poison hidden within her body, promising that, in exchange, he would grant her any wish. His words were full of threat, but there was also a hint of irony in them. At that moment, a girl unexpectedly approached them and immediately addressed Velita, interrupting their conversation. She was clearly completely confused by what was happening. It was Natalie, and her shocked expression couldn't go unnoticed. She was clearly stunned by what was happening around her and felt out of place. Natalie Alden was Velita's half-sister, and although her situation was quite complex, she remained an important figure in the household. Their relationship was firm, but complex. Although Carlin Alden did not recognize Natalie as a direct descendant, she was still allowed to live on the family estate, which became an exception to the rule for everyone else. The reason for Natalie's position was that she, like Luther, was an indispensable member of the Alden family, possessing important and rare talents that brought benefit to the family. However, at Carlin's direction, Natalie was forced to master the sword, which was an unexpected turn in her life. This gave her significance, but also brought additional complications. Velita and Natalie were sisters, and despite all the difficulties, they developed a fairly good relationship, which was a real rarity in the Alden family after Kang Hyun was reborn as Velita. It seemed that Velita was truly lucky that Natalie had appeared here at this very moment, because her presence could have somehow changed the situation, given new hope or an opportunity to solve the problem. Velita couldn't figure out what exactly was on his face. She was acutely aware that he was being threatened, but the expression unsettled her. It didn't fit the situation she found herself in. Natalie timidly asked if she'd intruded on their private moment. She wasn't sure how comfortable they could possibly be with this. There was a hint of apprehension in her words. Velita had no idea her sister was dating him, His Majesty. It was a surprise to her, and she could hardly imagine how they could end up together, sharing such intimacy. Suddenly, Velita realized that Natalie was indeed home, and that something more was happening between her and Noah. She couldn't believe how quickly their relationship had progressed. Noah said, with a strange note, that it was truly a pity, because he would have liked to enjoy this secret rendezvous a little longer. His words weren't exactly a joke, but they weren't entirely serious either. Velita was furious at the way he spoke. Does this bastard really think he can manipulate people so easily? She thought, completely confused about what was happening. She tried to say something in response, but at that moment she felt Noah's magic affect her. It was almost imperceptible, but enough for her to realize he was using his power again. Only moments later did Velita realize the pain had vanished. It was the result of his magic. His power had clearly lifted all her discomfort and granted her relief she hadn't even asked for. Noah, as if expecting gratitude, said that if the pain returned, she could always come to him. His voice was cold and self-assured, as if he were doing her a favor, not the other way around. He also remarked that, since she'd done him a favor, he was willing to kill whoever had hurt her. And he'd do it all completely free of charge, with no demands in return. His words carried weight. Then he took her hand and kissed it. The gesture was unexpected and filled her with neither joy nor horror. Everything that was happening seemed unreal and too fast. He said goodbye to her, as if not only had they finished their conversation, but everything that had happened up to that point was no longer important. Velita couldn't understand how things had come to this turn of events so quickly. Natalie was stunned to the core. Everything she saw defied explanation. The Duke next to her sister? The sight knocked the wind out from under her. The Duke usually left a sinister impression on her, But this time it was even more terrifying. He looked truly terrifying, as if he'd just emerged from a nightmare. Natalie tried to understand how her sister could have ended up with this man. Everything that was happening seemed completely unbelievable and strange to her. And if this whole thing really was a real date, then Natalie admitted she felt guilty. She may have unwittingly interrupted and now sincerely apologized for the misunderstanding. Velita wearily noted that her sister clearly had problems with her vision and logic. Her absurd questions were only irritating, and she clearly should just leave and rest. But her sister wouldn't let up, finding her rude. She called Velita mean, but admitted it was still interesting. It seemed the Duke was genuinely interested in her. Velita replied that perhaps he was interested, but certainly not in the way everyone was used to understanding it. Everything was much more complex and confusing than it seemed at first glance. Natalie shrugged, adding that there was no need to worry. Her father wouldn't know anything. He already couldn't stand the man, constantly calling him a strange and threatening owl. Incidentally, she recently ran into him by chance. The moment came back to her unexpectedly, as if fate were trying to warn her in advance or hint at something more. Velita clarified whether she was talking about the Duke, and Natalie confirmed it. There was no mistaking him. His figure, his voice, his manner, everything about him was unmistakable, even from a distance. It happened when Natalie was walking home alone. She was walking her usual route when she suddenly spotted him in an alley. At that moment, her heart sank with surprise. Usually he'd walk past her as if she didn't exist. But that day was different. He stopped, looked her straight in the eye, and started a conversation, something he'd never done before. Velita asked what exactly he'd said. Natalie replied that it wasn't anything special, just a few words, but his eyes clearly reflected weariness and disappointment. If you think about it, everything is repeating itself exactly as it did last time. Like a circle, the situation returns, leaving behind the same feelings, the same guesses, and a strange sense of inevitability. He knew what even the rejected children of the serpent looked like. He might not have immediately realized she was Alden, but something caught his attention. Perhaps he noticed her while he was watching the rest of their family. Velita confessed that she urgently needed Natalie to take her to the break room. After her confrontation with Luther and her conversation with the Duke, she simply had no strength left. She felt like she was about to collapse. But if he continues to refuse to change his behavior, it will all end in scandal. Just imagine, when he takes over the family, the entire castle will be in an uproar over his public behavior. Suddenly, a new task appeared before Velita, and with it a table. What she saw shocked her. Her heart began to pound as if foreboding disaster. While all this was happening, Graham was restless. His face betrayed anxiety. He looked as if he sensed something serious was about to happen, but couldn't yet figure out what it was. And suddenly someone approached him. It was unexpected. Graham hadn't expected to be addressed right in the middle of the ball. He was at a loss, unsure how to react. It turned out to be the Crown Prince himself. He asked a simple but strange question. Was Graham truly enjoying this ball? And he felt his insides tighten. Graham immediately bowed respectfully, according to all the rules of etiquette. He smiled tensely, trying to hide his embarrassment, as he hadn't expected the prince to suddenly speak to him. The prince, as if jokingly, remarked that Graham hadn't even danced today. The women were already losing hope and bursting into tears because none of them had been honored with his invitation. Graham thought for a moment and noted that he could not understand why he should dance, since he was a knight, and his duty was first and foremost to protect the crown prince and the emperor himself, and not to participate in a ball. However, the crown prince suggested dancing anyway, assuring them that with Graham's training and discipline, even during the dance he would not lose control of the situation. The knight calmly agreed to this, adding that he had actually already tried, but had been refused, and therefore did not even insist on it any further. The crown prince was astonished and asked with obvious bewilderment what kind of woman could dare to refuse Graham. He had never heard such a thing before. With a grin, he suggested that perhaps the knight had simply made his proposal to the wrong party. Maybe he should have asked a man to dance. Graham was a little confused. because he didn't expect that the Crown Prince seriously thought that there was no other reason for refusal at all. Then the Crown Prince, smiling, remarked that, generally speaking, he was right. A knight was rarely refused. But despite the lightness of his tone, these words struck Graham deeper than he expected. The prince added that the knight was too handsome to be rejected, and could not rest until he found out who exactly dared to do this, because it seemed almost impossible to him. Graham silently promised to tell everyone when the opportunity presented itself. He knew he couldn't hide it for long. At this time, Velita was already in the lounge. She had left the ball because she suddenly felt uneasy and needed peace and quiet. She sank onto the sofa, feeling a terrible heaviness in her body. She was overcome by an incomprehensible feeling of guilt, as if she were being punished for something. The pain in her head intensified so much that Velita could no longer hold back her groans. It seemed as if she couldn't bear it any longer. Her entire body was shaking with tension. This happened because Velita accidentally activated a hidden quest. She involved Graham too deeply, exceeding the required level, and thus opened the way to the secret ending. She couldn't understand why her actions had triggered the Graham line. At that moment, the prince suddenly remembered he'd forgotten to mention an important detail that explained everything. He noted that he had not invited Graham just like that, but because he wanted to introduce him to an important person with whom he would be working closely. Graham, slightly puzzled, asked again to make sure he'd understood correctly. While they were speaking, a noble lady was already approaching. It was Margaret Eboden, the girl who had now become the new keeper of the Setar clan's amulet, which immediately aroused everyone's interest. Lady Eboden introduced Graham formally, calling him the head of the knightly order, Graham Cortis, which was especially significant in their circle. Margaret was genuinely delighted to meet him, and Graham, for his part, congratulated her on being entrusted with the amulet, an ancient and responsible role. The Crown Prince said that since they would be crossing paths often from now on, they should establish friendly relations and get to know each other better. After all, the keeper of the amulet can never feel completely safe, even among allies, and must be on guard. Graham looked up at the boxes where Carlin Alden sat. His gaze was dark, almost angry. He was clearly displeased with what was happening. This world is full of people greedy for power and ancient relics. They leave no peace even for those who simply want to live in peace. The Aldens always target the most vulnerable for testing and then attack. That's why Graham asked if Margaret was okay. Margaret felt genuinely grateful for his concern. Even though much had happened recently, she sincerely believed she could handle it all and felt quite confident. The girl mentally noted that since her friends were by her side, any fears had receded. Their support gave her strength and confidence, making her believe that everything would be fine. The Crown Prince again assumed she was talking about the same girl Margaret often mentioned. He noted that she had been talking about this friend non-stop since their first meeting. Then he felt a desire to meet her. Margaret remarked that she hadn't seen her in a while. Perhaps she had gone out to the balcony and simply hadn't returned to the hall yet. Graham finally decided to ask if this was the young lady from the Oldegg family. He recalled that she had unusually expressive green eyes, hard to forget. Margaret immediately understood who he was talking about and confirmed that it was indeed Velita. She assumed they might already have known each other. At that moment, he finally realized that the girl who had been with Noah was Velita Alden. Her facial features, mannerisms, and voice came flooding back to him. Graham remembered seeing her. She looked tired and tense, and seemed to be looking for a place where she could rest a little in silence. The Crown Prince reasoned that if Graham knew so many details, it meant that they had had a conversation, and that he had personally communicated with Velita. Graham tried to explain, but the stern principal remarked with certainty that Lady Alden was indeed in that place. He left no doubt, even despite the knight's confusion. The captain seemed to be under the spell of her charm, perhaps without even realizing it. His gaze became absent-minded, and his demeanor unusually gentle. Despite this, Margaret was certain her friend couldn't have done anything like that. Meanwhile, the knight himself remained perplexed, silent, as if unsure what to do with himself. People whisper that Velita is a frivolous woman, preoccupied with nothing but cunning and intrigue. The rumors multiplied, fueled by others' discontent. But he cannot admit that the same girl is Velida, because despite the gossip and ridiculous accusations, she still smiles brightly at everyone. Yet, deep down, he began to realize that perhaps he had jumped to conclusions and was now regretting his decision. Perhaps he shouldn't have left her alone with Duke Elsius. Thoughts of the possible consequences haunted him. But soon the anxiety gave way to joy. The lady appeared in the hall. Her appearance immediately changed the mood of those present. Servants and courtiers surrounded her, vying with each other to ask about the ball. Everyone had heard it had been magnificent and were eager to hear the details. However, the lady gently made it clear that there would be time to discuss this later. She was not ready for a discussion right now. Austen couldn't understand what had happened. Lady looked as if her strength had deserted her and she was about to collapse from exhaustion. Velida was lost in her thoughts again, unable to comprehend what her life had become. It seemed as if everything that was happening to her was a punishment, and she couldn't understand why she was being punished. One of the servants, observing her experiences, noted that, in his opinion, she lived a completely ordinary and even calm life, unlike others. He also added that karma determines the fate of each person, and everything that happens in life is the result of one's own actions taken earlier. Hearing this, Velida, knowing how such reasoning works, decided that she had no choice but to punish him, let him feel how karma works by cutting his salary. Then he changed the subject and noted with alarm how pale she had become since the ball, adding that he would immediately call a doctor to check her health. To this, Velida replied that if she had known in advance how capable he was of pretending, she would have made him her personal spy at the palace long ago. She felt very tired, but what worried her most was that for some reason the ending of Graham had opened, and she couldn't understand why it was her. With Noah, it was clear. There really was a connection between them, because she saved him even before he met Margaret, and this influenced the course of history. But Graham is the head of a knightly order, and it's hardly just because Luther once slapped him. There's clearly another, more serious reason. Or maybe, if you think deeper, everything is much more complicated than it seems, and the reason is not on the surface, but hidden in the very course of the plot, which she has not yet unraveled. She approached Austen, thinking about how many had tried to get him 3 years ago. He was in high demand back then, and she was lucky he agreed to work for her. Austen confirmed that there were indeed many offers, but he chose her because he found her interesting. She also paid generously, much more than other employers. Velida inquired whether the head of the knightly order, Graham Cordis, had tried to recruit him. She had long been preoccupied with this question, knowing how important such personnel were. Austen looked dubiously at Graham. He couldn't understand why someone who already had to resort to force would need him. It seemed the offer hadn't come from the Duke himself, but from an acquaintance. This man had extensive connections, knew Captain Cordis, and assured Austen that he could also help him make profitable connections. There were many promises, but everything seemed dubious. However, the payment was too low. Austen politely declined, but now he wondered why Velida had decided to bring it up after so long. 3 years have passed, and in that time, she's only managed to fulfill the conditions for unlocking new endings twice. The first time was when she saved the twins from the Tang clan, risking everything. The second point was for hiring Austen. Velida felt these actions weren't random. If the twins were somehow connected to Noah's ending, then Austen was important too. It turns out that Austen was connected to Graham's ending, and perhaps played a key role in it. Velida began to wonder if she'd missed details she'd overlooked at the time. So, both endings could have been revealed 3 years ago. Realizing this, the girl felt a pang of guilt and hoped she wouldn't make such a mistake again, because the price was too high. But it was too late to regret it. It was all in the past, and now she had her loyal twins and her reliable ally, Austen, whom she could rely on at any moment. Velida noted that knowing the reason for the events now made her feel much better. Austen nevertheless inquired about what had happened today. Was it the unsuccessful debut that had caused her anxiety? But she immediately dispelled his doubts, saying that the debut went well, and the reason for her excitement had nothing to do with Margaret, It was something completely different. Austen then suggested that perhaps something had happened to the twins. Indeed, they soon appeared next to their owner, as if sensing her distress. The twins thought she was calling them, but Velita reassured them. Everything was fine now. She assumed they'd been through a rough time, but she didn't ask directly. However, they merely shrugged, assuring him that nothing terrible had happened. For them, eliminating villains didn't seem difficult or particularly special. Velita ran her hand through their hair, praised them, and expressed the hope that they were not injured, because it was important to her that they were okay. She then thanked them sincerely for saving her, knowing that without their intervention everything could have ended differently, and therefore she was especially grateful. She needed to make sure none of the enemies were left alive. She asked softly, and the twins merely nodded, confirming her guess. They said all the enemies had been eliminated. Velita realized how incompetent the people hired by Carlon were. They posed no threat at all. The more knowledge she accumulates, the better for her, especially if Rachel and Roxa develop quickly. These two will prove very useful in the final part of her adventure. She doesn't regret one bit her decision to save them back then, despite all the risks. She felt she did the right thing, and now it's paying off. She noted that she had asked them to bring back an item left behind by the robbers. She was primarily interested in whether there was any sign among them that could reveal key evidence. The twins seemed not to hear her, pretending to ignore her. She immediately realized they were withholding information, perhaps not wanting to upset her. When she realized that she hadn't really hoped for such an outcome, she realized that for her, this was just another quest, a test that she had to pass. In any case, she couldn't believe everyone was alive and everything had ended so happily. It was impossible, especially considering it could have ended in tragedy. Suddenly, a new red quest appeared before her, something unusual. Usually, all the tasks were blue, but this was something different, and it immediately caught her attention. The quest was a failure. She defeated the bandits but couldn't find the badge. A message stated there would be no reward because the objective hadn't been fully completed. The quest had failed, and the punishment was clear: death. This was unexpected, especially after surviving the attack. Velita couldn't believe her eyes, unsure whether to take this seriously. Yes, she hadn't found the badge, but surviving the attack was already a huge achievement. However, despite this, a new quest opened up for her. But the prince's patronage, so essential to her survival, remained beyond her reach. Velita needed to meet with them and try to regain their favor. If she failed, she would face punishment, death at the hands of Carlon. This task seemed like a simple quest, but the game seemed genuinely determined to destroy her. Death lurked at every turn, and she barely survived her previous trials. Although she survived, she failed to fully complete this task. If she fails to win the prince's trust this time, her fate will be sealed. Death is inevitable. The game seemed to be trying its best to destroy it. The twins, noticing its state, began asking questions. What was wrong with it, and did that icon really have such a meaning? They were ready to go back and look for it again. The twins tried to calm her down by offering her chocolate, and Austen was stunned by how solicitously these children treated a grown woman. This behavior didn't fit his expectations. Velita replied that even if they returned, Carlon had probably already taken the badge. There was no hope of its return. She had already lost everything she could. Austen, not quite understanding, asked if she really needed proof that the attack had occurred. For him, the situation remained confusing and complex. The gentleman replied that yes, they and the prince would definitely determine that this was Carlon's doing, but without proof, nothing would change. The law and the rules were merciless, and no amount of emotion could change the outcome. Perhaps the crown prince could find this badge. It was a faint hope, but in a situation where every chance mattered, even the slightest chance could change everything. It's entirely possible, and there's no need to worry in such a situation. If nothing can be done, worrying is pointless. Expecting change when it's impossible is a waste of energy. She needs to prepare for the conversation with her father. But to do so, it's crucial to first gain the prince's trust. Only then will it be more difficult for Carlon to gain the right to trade magical weapons. For the past 3 years, she has persistently tried to disrupt the Entente's activities. After all, in addition to regular trade, the organization also distributes magical weapons, which creates additional problems. Therefore, it is important to resolve the issue of Carlon's monopoly on the production and sale of such weapons. Otherwise, the situation will only get worse, and it will be easier for him to control the situation. In that case, she would need to establish good relations with the imperial family in order to successfully sabotage the elder Alden's plans and thereby weaken his position. Perhaps it's worth trying a different approach to gain the prince's trust. It's important to find a new approach that will strengthen your bond with him and buy you time to achieve your goals. The girl was surprised, but immediately turned to Kostian to clarify what he meant. The ambiguity in his words intrigued her, and she decided to get a precise explanation. He noticed that her badge bore the Carlon emblem. It was an important point she couldn't ignore, as the symbol could reveal much about her allegiance and intentions. She already knew this, and now she had to decide what to do with this information. Knowledge of the badge opened up new possibilities for political manipulation. They won't be able to handle this snake. Its head is too strong, and they won't have enough strength to bite it off. The battle will be difficult, and they must be prepared for the consequences. Creating family badges is no easy task. It's an art form, requiring specialized materials and careful selection. Everything matters. Sometimes, very rare materials are used to create them, including the blood of family members, to imbue the symbol with a piece of their power and heritage. This is important for preserving traditions. As the heir to the Alden family, Velida has access to the most important information related to such signs. She can learn all the intricacies of their creation and apply this knowledge in practice. Then she finally realized that Austin truly was a genius. His ability to predict events and find solutions amazed her. This strengthened her faith in his abilities. Even if she only obtains a small piece of this badge, she can use it. To do so, she'll need to obtain the materials, alert the craftsmen, and allow them to begin work. Velida couldn't imagine what she would do without Austin. His help was indispensable, and her confidence in his ability to perform under any circumstances grew stronger. Austin jokingly asked if it was okay to pet an adult on the head, since they weren't a child. He was a little embarrassed, but also curious about the gesture. Velida smiled. He was younger than her, after all, and after her rebirth, she began to feel older than she actually was. Her experience and knowledge were now essential in their interactions. She noted that, as his boss, she was allowed to make such gestures and asked Austin to recall their plan. However, she had to change it slightly, which displeased him. He was extremely irritated, asking why the plan had to be changed and what had happened. He didn't understand why it was necessary, since everything was going according to plan. Velida admitted she understood his feelings, but explained that there was no other way. She asked him to calm down, as there was no other way. Austin started screaming, not understanding what had happened. He demanded to be told immediately what had changed in the plan, as he should have known about it. The situation was extremely confusing to him. The girl explained that she had no choice, and that after saving the twins, everything changed dramatically. The situation escalated, and she was forced to make new decisions that changed the course of events. Austin reminded her that it had happened 3 years ago, so he wasn't sure what the past had to do with it. He thought it had something to do with the system, which she'd asked him to do something about regarding the head of the order. Velida replied that he was indeed a good man, and she was going to introduce him to Margaret. However, he didn't understand the problem, and then she began to suspect that the head of the order had taken an interest in her. Velida noted that Austin notices details very quickly, which is very convenient for her. Thanks to this, she doesn't have to explain everything in detail. He grasps everything quickly. Austin asked if the lady was serious and if it was really just him. He couldn't believe the situation had changed so much, and he needed more clarity to understand what was happening. Velida admitted that Duke Elsius was also involved, and that his involvement was also significant. Austin couldn't contain his emotions. He exclaimed that the lady had simply lost her mind. The whole thing seemed absurd to him. Austin was so angry he didn't know what to do with himself. He felt his anger growing, and he couldn't understand how this could have happened, why the circumstances had changed so much. He wondered how much the plan had changed. He was concerned that everything now looked so different, and he couldn't figure out how it would affect their next steps. Velita reassured him, saying the changes weren't all that significant. Fortunately, Margaret's potential husband, the Crown Prince, seemed genuinely interested in her, which could lead to new opportunities. However, she still didn't know how Margaret truly felt about the Crown Prince. She needed time to sort through her feelings and understand what would happen next. The Knight's Organ wasn't sure they would view Margaret as a potential romantic partner, and, in general, she herself wasn't particularly interested in them. Her opinion on the matter was quite clear. However, it was clear to her that her simple desire to get rid of these people might not be enough to make them retreat. It would require more effort on her part than she might have expected. She'll have to tolerate their presence until they achieve their goal. To others, it will look like they're simply trying to court her, though their true motives are hidden. Austen couldn't understand why he'd found himself in this situation. He knew Margaret was an exceptional individual, but he still couldn't fathom what had driven her to make such unusual decisions. The Duke decided that a meeting with Margaret could be useful, especially given that the two could play an important role in the future. He understood that their interaction was no coincidence, and that there was something hidden behind it. Austen concluded that she definitely needed their skills, but he couldn't figure out why. Everything remained vague, and it irritated him, giving him no peace. After all, she's a villain, and according to the plot, she's destined to die at the end of the game, and she has no way to avoid that fate. This imposed certain restrictions on her actions, which greatly complicated the situation. In any case, it wasn't worth paying too much attention to. Austen knew he had to get busy making the badge. Sometimes she'd send the twins to him, and he had no choice but to keep working. Austen said that the twins should stay close to the mistress, as she might do something reckless, and he needed to be sure that they were under control. The lady claimed she never acted rashly. All her actions were forced by circumstances, and she always tried to think before acting, although sometimes things didn't always work out. Austen then noted that he couldn't count the number of times Carlon and Luther had threatened her and humiliated her for trying to protect others. This increasingly alarmed and perplexed him. He also noticed that she appeared to have even cut her own hand to save the twins. It wasn't just a gesture, but a desperate act that left a mark on everyone who was there. The twins confirmed Austen's point. Indeed, the mistress sometimes acted impulsively, and although her actions might seem ill-considered, there was a logic and reason behind them. There was no need to mention that Luther had been slapped despite all the circumstances. This event remained in question and was not discussed at the time. Velita realized that she would have to take matters into her own hands, despite the threats from her father, who always tried to manipulate her, demanding immediate action. She knelt before him, feeling his rage as he screamed, demanding that she admit her guilt immediately, as if her life depended on it. At that moment, it was clear that she would have to confess if she wanted to stay alive, and there would be no other way out, as her father's pressure was becoming increasingly unbearable. Velita felt she couldn't keep her secrets any longer. The promise she'd made to herself had been broken, as she was forced to reveal what she'd hidden for so long. He wouldn't calm down, furiously asking why she could remain silent without explaining her guilt. It was like a cry of despair, draining her of her last strength. Velita realized that her father had found out about her relationship with Noah Elsius, and this was the cause of all her troubles, because he could not forgive her for choosing him. The moment she heard his accusations, Velita was in shock. Her whole life seemed to be falling apart, as she hadn't expected her father to reveal her secret so quickly. She couldn't believe this was happening to her. Her response was one of complete bewilderment, and she exclaimed that this was all some kind of nonsense, having nothing to do with reality. Her father didn't give her time to think, asking again if she thought he hadn't noticed her leaving the ball arm in arm with Elsius. Everything was becoming clear. The girl began to feel as if she was walking against her will, as if someone was imperceptibly guiding her steps. This realization came to her as the events around her began to seem increasingly strange and illogical. Then her father, noticing her confusion and tension, decided to ask what they were actually doing together in that situation. His questions were serious, and he expected an honest answer from his daughter. She couldn't admit the truth because she didn't want to upset him. Instead, she said he'd been asking strange questions, jumping from one to the next. It startled her a little, but she didn't know how to explain it. The newspaper immediately inquired about the nature of these questions. The girl replied that they were about Ananta and some twins, but she couldn't figure out how she could know what that meant. Everything was a mystery to her. Her father, hearing her answer, was shocked. He realized it was too strange and that it seemed someone had interfered too deeply in their lives, where they didn't belong. This greatly disturbed him. Velita, noticing the worry in his eyes, asked him a question, trying to understand what was really going on. She was trying to figure out if all this could somehow be connected to their family and her fate. Her father, irritated by her curiosity, snapped that it was none of her business. His patience snapped, and he began cursing as the situation with the amulet had become a real source of anxiety for him. Velita overheard the conversation between the middle prince and Margaret, and it didn't go unnoticed. She knew it was important information, so she treated it with due attention and awareness of the consequences. Velita was indeed aware of what was being discussed, and this gave her demeanor a certain determination. That's why she understood that a meeting with Austin was inevitable, and she needed to be prepared for the consequences. There was one but, however. Her father couldn't know she knew, as it could have undesirable consequences. She decided to tell him that Austin had inquired about her wishes, and leave it at that. Austin also mentioned something about a possible union between their families and the need for increased security. These conversations might not have been particularly important, but they were always a cause for concern in such situations, and the Velita couldn't ignore them. Her father, after listening to her, immediately began to doubt her words. He asked if that was all the information, and she confirmed it. However, he expressed his disbelief, which made her feel that something might be wrong. She realized her father no longer believed her words. His threat was clear. If she didn't reveal the truth, her life would be in danger. He was willing to do anything to find out, and her silence could be fatal. At that moment, Velita realized she had no choice but to speak. She understood that her life depended on her honesty, and if she wanted to continue to exist, she would have to reveal everything as it really was. Even if she tried to hide something, her father wouldn't believe her. He was already determined, and if she didn't tell the whole truth, he wouldn't stop and would take extreme measures. This moment proved decisive in her fate. Velita knew that in this situation, it was better to allow something important to change her life than to try to deceive her. She realized her choice was critical, and now all that remained was to accept the inevitable. At that moment, a servant entered the room, reporting a problem. His appearance added tension to the atmosphere, as the Velita knew this was no accident, but the beginning of something that could change her destiny. Carlin, noticing the alarm in the air, realized the situation was taking an unexpected turn. He realized that, despite his strict discipline, he would have to act differently to maintain control of what was happening. A servant reported that the Ananta had been invaded again. It wasn't the first such news, but it was still alarming. Such events always raised concerns, especially when security was at issue. Carlin, in disbelief, asked the servant again. He couldn't understand what had happened and tried to process what had been said, his voice full of doubt and tension. As soon as the information sank in, he was stunned. Austin, as always, was at her best, reacting promptly to the situation. Carlin couldn't help but appreciate her ability to act in such moments, but that didn't lessen his irritation with the whole situation. Carlin, unable to contain himself, cried out in despair. This latest intrusion was his limit. These attempts to disrupt their plans were becoming too frequent, and with each instance his irritation only grew. Despite the gravity of the situation, they were unable to deal with those who had been causing such unrest all this time. Recent incidents remained unpunished, further fueling the feeling of helplessness. After her father left, Velita, alone with Luther, couldn't contain the thoughts that tormented her. She said she deeply regretted not having died at that moment. The situation seemed hopeless, and despair overwhelmed her. Velita, noticing Luther standing there, asked why he wasn't moving. She sensed that now was not the time for reflection and that he needed to be more decisive. Velita concluded that perhaps the Duke had a vested interest in something terrible happening to Ananta. All these unfolding events seemed too suspicious to be coincidental. She felt that this was precisely why everything was happening the way it was. Her intuition told her there was more to this than just chance, and her doubts only grew stronger. Luther, realizing the gravity of the situation, was simply furious. His eyes blazed with anger, and without a word, he turned and rushed toward his father, ready to intervene and stop what was happening. Finally, with Luther gone, Velita was able to breathe a sigh of relief. Her nervousness and anxiety subsided somewhat, and while the tension didn't disappear, it was at least momentarily easier. Only 2 days had passed, but Velita immediately realized why she was so tired. The accumulated stress and anxiety had noticeably worsened her condition, and it was obvious to everyone. A maid suddenly burst into the room, concerned about her mistress's condition, and immediately asked if everything was all right. She noticed that Velita looked tired and somewhat haggard. The twins joined them. Velita informed them that now that Carlin and Luther were gone, they could warn Austin, but they shouldn't escalate the situation to the point of unnecessary casualties. The maid was horrified to see her mistress showing compassion even in such a situation. Carlin had nearly killed her, yet she continued to worry about others, even in such a dangerous situation. Velita remarked that this was precisely why she kept Ananta around, to keep everything under control. Now the situation was resolved, but the maid still felt that nothing was right. She noted with alarm that the deputy head had been mistaken in saying the lady was not in her right mind. This raised even more doubts in her mind, although Velita was confident that everything was under control. Afterwards, the maid helped her into bed. She laid her mistress down carefully, trying not to cause unnecessary discomfort, as Velita was clearly very weak. The twins, though they tried to hide their feelings, were clearly displeased about something. Their faces reflected worry and displeasure, though they tried not to voice their thoughts. Velita tried to calm the twins, assuring them that she was fine. She admitted that she had already taken her medication and didn't need any further help, so as not to worry them unnecessarily. The maid remarked that she found it difficult to understand how her mistress could be in such a state after what had happened. It was too difficult to remain calm and not react. She also couldn't understand how they could remain so angry. This feeling wasn't just strange. At times, it even evoked a sense of surprise. The maid thought that if Rachel and Roxa arrived at the last minute, it would be a very strange coincidence, which would add more tension to the situation. Despite all this, the lady remained admirable. Even standing at sword's length, she was able to stand up to these two tyrants, demonstrating her fortitude. She hoped the mistress wasn't angry, because in 2 years of working there, she'd never seen the mistress lose her patience. Her eyes always held a calm and balanced look. The woman admitted she sometimes gets angry, but said that if she did it every time, she simply wouldn't have the strength left. She also added that she had deliberately provoked Carlin and shouldn't pay attention to him. They had to understand her position, because very soon it would all be over, and they would be able to leave this place where they had been held for so long. Liberation was near. The twins could no longer hide their impatience and eagerly asked when they would finally be able to kill him and when the moment they had been waiting for so long would come. The lady smiled and replied that this would happen when they took from him everything he held dear, deprived him of everything he had. Only then would they be able to achieve their goal. After this, they lay down next to the lady, and she hugged them, giving them a feeling of warmth and security in this anxious moment when everything was decisive. It was time to rest. The day had been long and exhausting, and despite everything that had happened, it was time to prepare for the upcoming events that could change everything. She asked Lucy to turn off the lights so everyone could rest peacefully. The room fell silent, and only the faint glow from the window broke the darkness. Everyone settled in, preparing for a night's rest. She and the twins decided to get a good night's sleep. This was important, as they had a lot to do, and she knew the better they slept, the easier it would be to handle the tasks ahead. Velita had never experienced anything like this before. She was accustomed to a completely different way of life, filled with constant problems and unexpected situations, which seemed to be less common here. Kang Hyun, on the other hand, had already gotten used to all sorts of things even before her transformation. Working at a company under constant pressure taught her to be flexible and adapt to any situation, even the most challenging. Her previous life had been simply terrible, with her teacher constantly yelling at her. She couldn't understand why she was always to blame for every failure and why no one could support her. The teacher often yelled at her without understanding the problem, constantly blaming her. Kang-hyun tried to explain that it wasn't her fault, but her words fell on deaf ears, and her irritated teacher only grew more and more frustrated. Once she tried to say something in response, but the teacher shouted at her to be quiet. Her words meant nothing to those who were supposed to support and understand her. Both were obliged to follow him, and there was no way to refuse. They couldn't help but go, despite their dissatisfaction and fatigue, because there were obligations they couldn't ignore. The children were extremely unruly, and this was a nuisance to everyone. Problems constantly arose, and no one knew how to deal with them, despite all efforts to calm them down. She always forbade him from eating cookies. This was a matter of principle for her, and she categorically refused to allow herself to deviate from this rule, despite all his persuasions and requests. The orphanage she ended up in was a terrible place. The children lacked the warmth and care of adults. They often suffered bullying and brutal beatings from other children and some caregivers. The situation at school was no better. Teachers paid little attention to her problems, and her classmates offered no support. Local children often bullied her, pushing her further into isolation. Of course, it was unfair, but she was used to it. Such things seemed to her a part of life, not worth resisting, and she understood that it was entirely expected in her situation. All of this became her normal state. She learned to cope with it, accepting it as an integral part of her life. This world was normal for her, even if it was cruel and cold. At least she could still count on some income. The shelter director promised to cut her allowance, but that didn't exactly console her in her situation. At one point, she overheard two guys talking about the computer club. They discussed it as if it were something important and interesting, and her attention was immediately drawn to their words. The two guys were discussing the club with such enthusiasm that her curiosity was involuntarily piqued. She decided to find out more about what exactly they were talking about and what might interest her about it. Thoughts of the computer club never left her. She constantly wondered what kind of place it was and whether it could become something meaningful for her. Gradually, it began to take up more and more of her time and attention. Ultimately, she decided she would go. Without knowing why, she felt she needed to take this step now, though she knew her decision was more impulsive than rational. It didn't even occur to her that she wouldn't be able to afford the luxury of going to such a place. Impulsively, with unconscious determination, she made the decision, unaware of the consequences. She entered the game and felt genuine excitement, a sense that here she was, finally, in the world she dreamed of for so long. Her heart beat with joy, for so many unexplored possibilities lay ahead. The game world turned out to be much more complex and multifaceted than she expected. It was like immersing herself in an entirely different reality, where every detail mattered and demanded attention. At that moment, she realized a path full of challenges and opportunities had opened up before her. A dream that had seemed distant began to take shape, and her imagination was filled with the desire to change the world. After graduating, she wasted no time and immediately found a job at a game development company. This was a logical step to getting closer to her dream and starting to make it a reality. However, reality turned out to be far different from what she had imagined. Everything turned out to be much more complicated than she had imagined, and every day brought new difficulties and obstacles on the path to her goal. Constant comments and criticism from colleagues became part of her daily life. Her boss was extremely dissatisfied with her work and the project, which, in his opinion, had no chance of success. He'd repeatedly said that if they released a game like that, the company would inevitably go bankrupt. It was his opinion, and it haunted her, despite her belief to the contrary. The boss declared he had no intention of increasing the project's budget. He insisted that she take full responsibility for its success or failure, warning that in the event of failure, she would bear the consequences. She, in turn, stated that even these funds would barely cover the most basic product. The project's complexity significantly exceeded the requested budget, and she had to find a solution. But despite the difficulties, she remained determined. She firmly stated that she had to do everything possible to create a worthy project within budget, otherwise her dream would remain just that, a dream. She understood that if she didn't stick to budget, she'd be forced to cover the costs out of her own salary. It was a step she took because she believed in the success of her project. It took her a while to realize how difficult it would be to realize this dream. Creating a game that would not only be successful, but also bring joy to others, turned out to be much more difficult than she had imagined. She was confused, unable to understand how, with so many people on the team, it was possible to stay within budget. Everything wasn't going as she'd hoped, and this thought was becoming increasingly depressing. However, she realized she couldn't simply sit idly by. She had to at least try to change the situation, even if it seemed impossible. This was her chance, and she was determined not to miss it. It was Friday, and her colleagues were already planning to go out for a drink. They were, as always, looking forward to the moment to unwind, but she was focused on work and couldn't afford it. At that moment, the main character suddenly turned to the headmistress, as if driven by a sudden decision. She felt the time had come to talk, even though it was unexpected for everyone. She asked the manager to stay on and work overtime. The budget was tight, the release date was already set, and even the slightest delay couldn't be allowed. The responsibility rested on her shoulders. But the headmistress apologized, explaining that it was her father's birthday and she needed to get home. Khan understood that everyone had important things to do, but this created additional problems for her. If it weren't for the manager's plans, she would have happily stayed on for overtime. But now, that evening, the situation didn't allow it. Khan had to accept this with understanding, even though the situation was unpleasant. As always, Khan quickly realized there was nothing she could do. It was all starting to seem pointless. Her colleagues often thought she was crazy for being willing to work overtime, but it was important to her. In any case, they found a great place to relax and decided they could unwind and have a good time. It was a much-needed moment of respite, despite all the challenges of work. The situation was the same as at school. If the company doesn't allocate a budget, if the work is enormous, and colleagues don't care about the project, the result will always be the same. That was the reality. And then, suddenly, Deputy John approached. He asked if she was working overtime today. This was another moment when Khan would have to make a decision that would impact the entire process. He offered to help, but the lady said it wasn't worth it. Despite her words, he was willing to help if she decided he needed support. He added that if there's too much work to do, it's better to have two brains than just your own. Having said this, he smiled, offering his help without further ado. He also noted that it wouldn't be any easier for her to work alone at night. This was especially important to her, and she felt grateful for his offer of help at such a difficult time. Despite the coldness and hostility she encountered from others, she was still grateful for the support she received, even if it was rare and modest. However, all good things must come to an end. She soon realized that everything she had planned had come to its logical conclusion, and she was preparing for a new chapter in her life. The game she conceived with the Guardians wasn't just a success. It was a true hit, becoming a bestseller and bringing the company unprecedented popularity and recognition. Margaret's kindness and fairness became the qualities that set her apart from others. Perhaps this is why she was so beloved, and her success was obvious to all. Khan strove to create the kind of person she always dreamed of becoming. Her efforts to create an ideal were bound to bring her success, and it couldn't go unnoticed. It was hard to understand how anyone could dislike her. Her sincerity and desire to help others were what attracted people to her and allowed her to create an atmosphere of respect and recognition. Velita woke up and realized it was morning. She felt slightly tired, but she knew a new day lay ahead, filled with new opportunities and challenges that couldn't daunt her. The twins were still asleep, and when she turned over, their peaceful appearance filled her with warmth. They looked so vulnerable and sweet that her heart immediately filled with peace. She stroked them gently, feeling her fingers glide through the soft hair. It dawned on her then. It had all been a dream. It was time to let go of the past and forget those images that kept returning. Life had been so difficult and full of challenges that she could count on her fingers all the moments that had brought her joy. She couldn't understand why these memories continued to haunt her like a dream, giving her no peace. She tried to forget what had happened, but despite her best efforts, her memories wouldn't let go. Every time, no matter how hard she tried, the past invariably returned, as if her memory couldn't forget what had happened. After balls where a wide variety of topics were discussed, Margaret was always the center of attention. Her beauty eclipsed everything around her, and she became an object of admiration. Many men fell genuinely in love with her. The family began searching for various treasures that could provide their sons with a future of tasty and nutritious food. Their desire for wealth and stability led them to new adventures and quests. Ibadin, the eldest daughter, was the keeper of an important amulet passed down through generations. It was a symbol of her responsibility and the power she wielded. Her family was part of a guild that specialized in supplying metals needed to create magical tools. Collaboration with other craftsmen would be beneficial for everyone, and they were willing to develop this line of work. Carlin couldn't allow the man to consider searching for blue gold elsewhere. This wasn't just a demand, but a mandatory condition he dictated to maintain his position. The Aboden family was only alive thanks to the support of the Alden family. Without their assistance, they would not have survived this difficult political situation, and Carlin knew it well. Only the Alden family had the means to supply the Flame Guild with mana stones. However, betrayal on their part would mean the loss of all benefits, and Carlin was not prepared to turn a blind eye to that. Velita couldn't help but notice how threats and manipulation had become her father's signature style. It was his way of keeping everyone in line, always playing on the fears and interests of others. However, if someone else decides to start producing magical instruments, the consequences will be very serious. This will disrupt the established system and create unexpected difficulties for everyone involved. To create magical tools, 2 key components are required: mana ore, which is infused with mana, and blue gold, which activates these magical properties, combining them into one. Blue gold was a rare and difficult to find resource, unlike mana stones. It could only be found in deep mines, where extraction required not only effort but also great risk. Due to a shortage of deposits, rumors spread that the Ibodin family had decided to sell blue gold to other guilds. This raised numerous questions and discontent among competitors. Carlin couldn't forgive such a move. Such a move from Ibodin would be treason, and he was prepared to act decisively to prevent any attempt to disrupt the established order. They had no choice but to submit, because their situation was too difficult to change. The only thing left was to submit to the circumstances. However, Velita had heard rumors that the Crown Prince was genuinely interested in their minds. This alarmed her. As if he decided to take them under his wing, it could change the situation. Margaret confirmed this information, but her father was deeply worried. If they made a deal with the imperial family, it would certainly displease the Marquis, who would be unlikely to agree with such a decision. Margaret increasingly doubted how long the Crown Prince would be able to protect their family. Trusting him too deeply was dangerous. His intentions could change, and she had to be careful. There was no guarantee he wouldn't abandon his support. Too much depended on his will, and Margaret understood that her trust in the prince might be misplaced and unjustified. In fact, the game had a bad ending where Margaret mistakenly sold all the mines to the Crown Prince. This thought made her consider taking steps that weren't in the original game. Velita suggested Margaret inform the Crown Prince that they weren't ready to sell the mines just yet. This was an important decision, as the situation could change if they acted hastily. At the moment, things weren't ideal. Problems with the production of Kirk instruments arose that required immediate attention. Margaret agreed with the plan and decided not to rush into a final decision. Margaret didn't ask unnecessary questions or inquire into the causalities of what was happening. She trusted Velita completely, knowing that her decisions were always based on common sense and due caution. Every time Margaret followed her instructions, she felt a tension within herself, as if something was wrong. This feeling never left her, and it felt like something was constantly scratching at her soul. However, there was another important moment in her life that somewhat troubled her. A marriage proposal that wasn't as simple as it seemed at first glance. It had a host of consequences. Velita had heard of the many offers Margaret was currently receiving. She already sensed that the young woman had likely chosen one of her suitors, as there were always suitors around her. Margaret confidently declared that this wasn't true, that she couldn't understand how anyone could make a choice when she hadn't even seen any of the candidates yet. It seemed absurd and premature to her. Velita, as always, remained unwavering in her judgment, and, given the political situation, understood that Margaret had little understanding of such matters. But this didn't surprise her. She merely observed from the sidelines. Velita didn't come to discuss the matter. She was more interested in finding out whether Margaret had been invited to the ball. The event always attracted the attention of high society, and her participation could have made a big difference. Margaret explained that she'd received numerous invitations, but had declined all but those with whom her family had a long-standing relationship. She didn't have the time to participate in other events. It was all too tiring. Margaret was never accustomed to this kind of thing. She understood that she needed connections in high places to strengthen her position and expand her influence. This was a crucial element of her future. So she suggested that Velita take on this task and recruit people to her side. She felt the time had come to act and build relationships with those who could help in the current situation. Velita noticed that Margaret was still unaccustomed to balls and official events. However, she had too few aristocratic connections to promote herself and make the necessary connections. So, to help her, they needed to open a salon. It was an excellent way to give Margaret the opportunity to interact with the right people and strengthen her position among the highborn. In aristocratic circles, the salon was not just a meeting place but also a hub for making new acquaintances. Themed evenings held there provided an excellent opportunity for social exchange. There, amidst conversations and meetings, hidden talents were discovered, and people made useful connections. It was a wonderful way to advance Margaret in high society and cement her status in society. However, opening such a salon required funds that Velita couldn't find in her own sources. This meant she would have to turn to the Crown Prince for the necessary loan. Jaren asked the lady if she really wanted to send Lady Abaddon to the palace to ask the prince for money. He couldn't understand how anyone could possibly take such a step. He was shocked, because if the prince perceived this as insolence, all their plans could collapse. It was truly risky, but Velita was confident in her goal. But in Velita's opinion, there was nothing to worry about. Margaret had received the amulet thanks to her exceptional abilities, and it could play a key role in their future success. This amulet could help not only keep the Aldens in check, but also strengthen the Emperor's power. Therefore, despite all the risks, Velita believed everything was in order and their actions were justified. Jaren understood her point, but he couldn't help but wonder what the theme of this salon would be. This was an important clarification for understanding how they would move forward. The lady reflected on the attention drawn to magical blue gold, as well as on people who understood mana stones. It was more than just interest. It was a market with many opportunities. The blue gold trade and the flaming goings-on in the guild were becoming increasingly common topics of conversation. People discussed it at dinner and meetings, which fueled interest. There was a growing sense that something important was about to happen. They needed craftsmen who could set up the place and prepare the treats. This wasn't just a requirement, but a necessity for a successful start. Without good specialists, the business wouldn't move forward. People were willing to pay money for delicious desserts, and this played into the lady's hands. Nothing could compare to the pleasure of enjoying caramel apples. This would be a real hit if approached correctly. All the ingredients for the desserts were readily available and of excellent quality. If the salon received positive reviews, it would soon become the talk of the town. Delicious treats could bring success. She also inquired about the progress of the counterfeit badge production. This question was no less important than any preparations for the opening. Everything had to be top-notch for everything to go off without a hitch. Jaren reported that the fake badge was almost ready. He promised that the lady would receive it on the salon's opening day. This was important to both of them, as details played a significant role in the success of her business. It would be wonderful to have a sacred reunion, but now she had to think about what dessert to treat Austin to. She knew this choice was important, and she wanted to make it memorable. As always, Jaren escorted his mistress to the carriage. He was her faithful assistant and supporter, and this had become their ritual. His presence gave her a sense of security and confidence that all would be well. At the end, Jaren kissed her hand, without wishing her safe travels. The gesture was simple but meaningful. It was a sign of respect, and the lady sensed warmth and sincerity in it. The lady said goodbye to him, smiling back. She appreciated his devotion and attention, and their farewells became familiar, always leaving a feeling of comfort and understanding. The budget was small, and it was crucial to allocate funds wisely. Everything depended on how wisely the available resources were managed. Small expenses at the start could lead to big results down the road. The manager said she needed to create a quality game. Games with a good storyline have always been popular. This was key to success, and the lady knew she had to put all her efforts into it. CEO Can declared that her new game, which she would invest her own money in, would be significantly more exciting and engaging than anything she had previously created. It was a promise. It wasn't just a coincidence that Jaren decided to pay attention to what was happening. He knew for a fact that Valida did indeed resemble Can. It wasn't just his impression, but a genuine resemblance he'd noticed. Margaret decided to visit His Highness in person to convey an important request. She had already prepared everything she wanted to say and, confident in her words, approached him with clear intent. The girl gave him no time to think and insisted on 2 audiences to get her point across. She was determined, and the prince, seeing her persistence, felt her request was worth considering. However, her suddenness and serious gaze left him with questions. What could have happened that she had come now? Her behavior was alarming, and the prince couldn't understand the meaning behind her request. Perhaps a sudden problem had arisen in her life, and she couldn't simply leave it unsolved. The prince was eager to learn all the details, hoping to understand what was really going on. The girl told him she currently needed money to implement her idea. The prince was interested, and she, without hiding her intentions, announced that her request would concern opening a salon. When the crown prince heard her words, he was stunned. Opening a salon? That was something unexpected. He was a little taken aback, but he decided to hear her out to understand what she wanted from him. She explained that her plan would not only help her make the right connections, but also allow her to find like-minded people. With this approach, she hoped to create a space for herself and others who shared her ideas. Of course, she wasn't going to ask for his help just like that. She didn't have the necessary funds to open a salon, so she was looking for support. But she had other resources, her skills and experience. In exchange, she offered her labor and talent. If the salon's opening was successful, the prince would be given the opportunity to take control of the Alden family business, opening up new horizons for him. He'd long been aware that they were having problems producing magical instruments. These difficulties were obvious, and everyone involved was aware of the situation. He was no exception. The crown prince reacted quickly to the situation and declared his complete agreement with the proposal. His decision was made instantly, leaving no time for reflection, confirming his confidence. However, the prince added an important condition. He would continue to attend the salon, but now as an investor. This gave him new rights and opportunities, which made perfect sense given his interests and influence. So, if that was all there was to discuss, then once all the formalities were completed, they could move on. All the details were settled, and the parties could continue their business. The lady was sincerely grateful to him for his support and decision, which was reflected in her smile. It was a sign of appreciation that did not go unnoticed, as her emotions were sincere and genuine. When she left the room, the prince couldn't help but smile. His face lit up with a slight expression of pleasure, which, despite his stern nature, was rare. Margaret truly left a lasting impression on him. Her personal qualities, confidence, and courage in decision-making stood out even against his usual reserve and affection for her. She showed courage when she didn't ask for a loan, but simply made a decision, boldly pursuing her goal. This was her principled stance, and although she was decisive, her audacity could not leave anyone indifferent. And it seemed the crown prince was genuinely pleased. He felt a slight sense of satisfaction at having met such a determined and goal-oriented woman who was unafraid to follow her principles. Of course, that was true. Not everyone could have made him smile like that, for despite his status, his inner coldness was his defining characteristic. However, Margaret changed that. She said he was capable of taking control of the Aldens, and that piqued his interest. The question is, Does her friend know about this? It seems Alden's daughter has decided to help Lady Aboden with her case. But even if Lady Alden did help her, the question remains, how did she learn such vital information? Lady Valida is clearly not who everyone thinks she is. There's something about her that doesn't add up. He admitted that Graham had indeed been right. This confirmed his understanding of the situation, and he now sees the picture a little differently, although he still doesn't fully grasp all the nuances of what's happening. Apparently, she decided to collaborate with Lady Aboden to help control her father. This is a strategic move that opens new opportunities for both sides and strengthens their positions. The Crown Prince noticed that Graham was indeed showing interest in her. The situation took on additional nuances, and it seemed Graham should now be pleased that such interest existed. Graham quickly dismissed these allegations, declaring that his concerns were completely unrelated. He obviously had no intention of accompanying him to the salon, so he would delegate security to someone else. He wondered who would actually go with him to this salon. The question was a difficult one, and Graham knew the decision wouldn't be so easy, as it could affect the outcome of the upcoming meeting. Graham tried to feign indifference, even turning away from the Crown Prince. It was his way of hiding his own emotions, though not entirely successful, as everyone could clearly see his state. However, it seemed he had finally agreed to go with him. It would have been difficult to back down from that decision, especially in a situation like this, when all eyes were on him and his actions. The Alden family's magical instrument business has recently been experiencing a downturn. Their once stable business is now facing serious difficulties, and this has inevitably impacted their situation. Noah's servant noted that they had tried to hide the problems, but now the decline in production had become so severe that it was no longer possible to hide anything. Everyone could see that the situation was worse than they had attempted to portray. Both customers and everyone who dealt with the Aldens had already noticed the decline in quality along with the decline in production. It was obvious, and no one could ignore it, which put the family in an even more vulnerable position. It all began almost 2 years ago, when the situation began to worsen and the first signs of trouble became apparent. It all seemed like a coincidence, but then it became clear that the situation was not so simple. The Duke was quite surprised to hear how long this had been going on. He hadn't expected such events to drag on for so long, or that their consequences would be so devastating for the entire region. It was then that this decline began, and it continued to unfold and become more noticeable with each passing day. It seemed as if events were gaining momentum and were beginning to impact many people. If all this is true, it marks the first serious challenge Ananta has faced. 2 years ago, a slave escape shook her entire system, disrupting its normal order. Even then, production was under threat, and all of this caused serious economic damage. Much time passed, and the situation only worsened, as if its traces continued to haunt them. And that day, the twins from the Tang clan disappeared. Their disappearance became another link in a chain of events that seemed to leave no hope of a quick resolution. Everything was intertwined. The escape of the slaves, the disappearance of the twins, and the strange girl who bought them. Furthermore, another mystery was written into this complex pattern: her strange behavior. It's strange to think that Valida could have been the very girl who became part of this incident, but perhaps she wasn't. It's hard to believe she was involved in such momentous events. She was a mysterious person who immediately recognized Duke Elsius, but did not hesitate and decided to help him, despite her strangeness and the dangers that could lie in wait for her. And then, as if nothing had happened, she began to act as if she had nothing to do with it. Her actions remained unclear, and no one could quite figure out what was behind her actions. She wasn't afraid to say everything she thought straight to his face. Her words were honest and blunt, and she made no attempt to hide her true intentions, despite the possible consequences. The girl, oblivious to all the cruelty she faced despite her origins, was the daughter of the serpent Alden. The setbacks, trials, and cruelty of life did not break her. He was certain she wasn't what she was often described as. None of this corresponded to her true nature, and he knew that behind it all lay a completely different personality, hidden from prying eyes. But was she really as talented as he thought? He began to ponder this and decided to find out more. To confirm his suspicions, he turned to questions about the slaves who craft mana stones. Those monitoring Ananta managed to rescue several people from this hell. However, many remained captive. The Duke ordered that the rescued slaves be monitored to ensure they did not escape, as they could be used as witnesses. These slaves could be of help if treated and protected, but if they rebelled, no one could predict what would happen to them. The situation was extremely dangerous and required careful handling. The Duke smiled and said he needed these slaves not only to assist, but also to be supervised until the situation was resolved. Everything had to be carefully planned and without unnecessary risks. If everything was done correctly, they would be released immediately, and it would be certain that any remaining evidence would be eliminated. The entire operation required the utmost caution. In addition, the report on the new production of magical instruments he had requested was submitted. The document was ready, and its contents reflected the importance and success of the work completed. Such a diverse range and quality of products was simply unimaginable. It was truly an impressive achievement, opening new horizons for further research and technological implementation. The Duke was quite impressed and, without hiding his interest, expressed a desire to know the location of the workshops. The place intrigued him, and he wanted precise information about its location. The servant reported that the workshops were scattered across various locations, making them quite difficult to find. This made the search more challenging and required additional effort. The Duke, unwavering in his resolve, said they should continue searching if they were truly like the Aldens. He understood that such places needed to be under secure control, and he had no intention of backing down. He also added that he was interested in a magical instrument designed for soundproofing. This was an important detail that could play a role in his future plans. At that moment, exactly the same instrument happened to be in the coffee shop. This couldn't have been a coincidence, and its presence in such a place made one wonder about many things, perhaps about the events connected to it. The Duke realized he could no longer doubt what was happening. All the elements were coming together to form a coherent picture, and doubts were fading, giving way to certainty and the urgency to act. He wondered if perhaps he should revisit this place to find out all the details. There was something drawing him back, perhaps some important information that could be revealed on a subsequent visit. He began to wonder if she really knew about the events surrounding Anant. It could all be somehow connected to that unusual incident that had occurred 3 years ago, and this thought kept haunting his mind. Ultimately, he decided to meet with her to finally clarify the circumstances. This was necessary to clarify the situation and get answers to all the questions that had arisen.